Good afternoon, conference. I hope you had a good lunch, and we now move to a series of constitutional amendments, starting off with F40, which is the Young Liberals age limit change. So I'd like to ask Catherine Macy to stand by, and I now call Tara Copeland to move the motion. Tara doesn't have her camera working, so she will be speaking on audio only. Thanks very much, Tara.
Oh, yeah, apologies. In the last couple of minutes, I managed to work out the camera on my laptop. Good afternoon, conference. I'll keep this relatively short and sweet. What this amendment seeks to do is to grant the Young Liberals more control in determining who can be a member of our organization. At present, if we want to make changes to the membership, we must bring a motion such as this to conference. What this means is that there's less time for conference to debate other important policy changes and constitutional amendments. And it also means that the organization of our youth wing is not truly in the hands of our young members. We're not bringing this change out of the blue. Over the past few years, the Young Liberals have extensively consulted with our members and have had numerous discussions with the party president and with HQ about giving Young Liberals the power to set their own age limits. We have already put in place a trial system where members between the ages of 26 and 30 can opt into Young Liberal membership for our organization. And we've seen a fantastic uptake and it's massively benefited the organization with the participation of these new members. So what this amendment really allows us to do is to implement the changes that our membership have been asking for. To our older audience members, I can reassure you, we won't be dragging you all back into the Young Liberals. Indeed, our proposal of 30 as the upper age limit at present is well below the upper age limit of many of our sister parties in Europe. So conference, please trust the young people of this party to set our own rules for the Young Liberals, and please vote in favor of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tara. Could I ask Jack Worrell to stand by, and I now call Catherine Macy.
Thank you, conference. I'm delighted to finally be able to speak on this. When I first informed my family that we were attempting to do this, my grandmother poured herself another glass of wine and then proceeded to tell me the challenge she had raising the age limit when she was in the Young Liberals in the 60s or 50s. It's since become a joke where she asks me how we're doing about it, and I reluctantly have to give her the little bit of information I have. Throughout my 3 years on the executive, I look forward to being able to retire from the executive, having successfully passed the age limit range, which has been championed by almost every single executive member in the past 3 years. It's something that's so important because young people are here right now. People like saying we're the future, but I like reminding them we're also the present. We've passed policy at this conference, we've done fringes, we've done training, and we are candidates successfully winning across the country. We also need to be engaging more and more with our European brothers and sisters and those of any gender. As Tara said, we actually get looked down upon for having such a young age limit compared to our European counterparts. The age limit increase will not only improve diversity amongst the Young Liberals, but also increase the ability for us to take advantage of the many skills that you gain in those 5 extra years that are incredibly precious. We often get accused of being a very middle-class party, something that's not wrong and is something that I'm very excited to see change happening very, very soon. However, if we allow ourselves to increase this age, we stop being university-focused. People stop getting to the age of 21 or 22, graduating, and then realizing everyone around them is still an undergraduate student and a little bit younger than they want to be around necessarily. This age change is really important in improving so many aspects of not just the Young Liberals, but the party. And I'm really, really proud of Tara and everyone who's done so much work on this motion. So please vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Could I ask Mark Pack to stand by? He'll be summating on the motion. And can I call Jack Worrell?
Thank you. Good afternoon, conference. For the last 4 years, I've been on the Young Liberals executive for 3.5 of them, only recently taken a step back. I know I don't look old enough for that, do I? But over the last 4 years, I've seen a titanic shift of our youth wing from the ridiculous to the sublime. When I came onto the Young Liberals executive, we were barely able to perform the basic functions of what you'd expect a political youth wing. We had no hope of getting policy motions to conference. Our freshers campaign done in a rush, our campaigning ability low, and we definitely had our fair share of scandals, not limited to, the notorious National Young Liberals chat box. Our reputation within the party was at a low. Over the next 3 years, we set out on a journey. Several amazing and hard-working officers of the Young Liberals put the time, effort and pure hard work to take us from this position to steadily increasing our reputation, doing more for our young members and professionalising the organisation. And my goodness, conference, all of that hard work has paid off. We have seen the highest quality in our motions at conferences of past, including the Uyghur motion, which only 2 people voted against. Our speakers at this conference have been wonderful. I'm really jealous of their ability to orate to conference. Young Liberals Conference in Manchester innovated in bringing in a hybrid format and a high attendance. We helped win Cheshire and Amersham. We were there early, often, and in high numbers. Branches are being developed like we've never managed to do before. Our website and communications are gaining us more outside media than anyone could have dreamt of years ago. We're leading the way in our international youth politics in Limerick and beyond. Our freshers materials look slick and professional. The training we do is equipping our generation with the tools they need to succeed. Young Liberals proliferate every internal committee in this party, contributing amazingly everywhere. This is a youth wing we can all be proud of, conference. However, just as hard and long these victories were won, is as easy and quick they can be lost again, which is why it is vital we pass this constitutional change before us. We have a current golden generation of active, engaged and talented young people. And as they move forward to being young professionals, we need the ability to retain their institutional memory. To keep these folk and the talented young people currently coming through the ranks is imperative to keeping our youth wing on the right track and indeed moving us on to greater heights. I would urge conference to back the Young Liberals and back this constitutional amendment.
Thank you very much, Jack. And I now call on Mark Pack to summate the motion.
Thank you, Cara. I'm very pleased to be able to summate on this motion, partly because with no speakers against, it's one of the easier speaking gigs at this conference, but also because it's a really good motion. And I want to pay huge tribute to everyone in the Young Liberals in particular who's been involved in both preparing this motion and prior to that, the pilot that Tara mentioned at the start of this debate. It's also, I think, a really important motion, not only for Young Liberals and for the reasons that we've heard very eloquently through this debate, but also for our sort of internal democracy. It's right that it should be the Young Liberals organisation that is deciding what their definition of young is. Otherwise, I mean, all of us can tend to make jokes about what we think of counts as young, and it always tends to be just a couple of years older than whoever the speaker is. But definitely it should be for Young Liberals to make that decision. But it's also a really important motion for the whole party, because it's not only that Young Liberals are such an important source of both current and future activists, but also a strong and healthy Young Liberal organisation is a really important way of helping make sure that as a party we lose fewer activists when they move from one part of the country to another. And with our dependence on local party structures, sadly, it's one of the most common ways in which activists drop out of the parties. They move from one area to another. They, for whatever reason, don't quite get stuck into the new local party and they drift away a bit from the party. Having really strong party bodies, which hopefully we've also helped with the reforms that were passed yesterday, and a really strong Young Liberal organisation is a really important way to strengthen all of the party. So I really hope that you will vote for this motion. I really want to once again pay thanks and tribute to all the huge amounts of hard work I know Young Liberals have put into bringing this proposal. Please vote for it.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I should have just pointed out at the beginning that, of course, as a result of the changes we voted on yesterday, the initials SAO in the motion should, of course, be AO, affiliated organisation. So we're now going to move to the vote on this motion, and as a constitutional amendment, it will require a 2/3 majority to go through. So Nick will be opening that vote up now. So I can now announce the results of that vote. It's 151 for and 5 against, so I think that's a clear 2/3 majority there. So that constitutional amendment is passed. We now move on to the next constitutional amendment, which is F41, Empowering Liberal Democrat Values for People and Planet. And can I ask Duncan Brack to stand by, and I now call Keith Melton.
Me, Cara? You can hear me now?
Yes.
Thank
Yes,
you,
I can.
Cara. Good afternoon, conference. I've been a small L Liberal for as long as I can recall, and a large L Liberal since I stood as a Liberal candidate in our school's mock election in 1964. Indeed, I was a Liberal long before I was even aware that my father actually did know Lloyd George and had been a young Liberal representative himself to the Liberal Assembly in 1930. So the values of the party are indeed part of my DNA. I therefore get very irritated when I hear or read about people who don't know what we stand for. Of course, we all know what we stand for: liberty, equality and community, in which no one shall be enslaved by poverty, ignorance or conformity. That, however, is as far as most commentators will read in the preamble to our Constitution when, or if, they do any research before commenting on what they think we are all about. As you all know, of course, we've had a debate on our principles and values at this conference, and I'm sure I'm not the only person to be moved by Christine Cheng's summary of that debate on Sunday. I'm sure, too, that I'm not the only person to have applauded Ed Davey's speech yesterday when he berated Boris Johnson for his lies about the UK leading the way on climate change and about his government's cuts to overseas aid and the damage that will do to the COP26 conference. Ed said those cuts are indecent, immoral and wrong. Ed also said our planet is in danger, and our party first noted the environmental warnings decades ago. As I said in my opening, I'm a Liberal to the core, but I was actually a bit of a latecomer to link that core value to the environment. Indeed, I was already 24 when I set up my first environmental action group in Manchester, that hotbed of young Liberals. Mind you, that was back in 1971. By 1978, I had joined the then recently formed Liberal Ecology Group, eventually becoming the first chair of the Green Liberal Democrats when the party was formed in 1988. Since that time, of course, the party has accumulated a whole plethora of environmental policy, more and better than any other party in this country, blue, green or red. But policy comes and goes. It dates and gets changed. It bobs in and out of manifestos. But this is not a policy debate. It's a constitutional debate. So why? The preamble to the Liberal Democrat Constitution represents the bedrock upon which our party is built, the foundation of our values and principles and policies, and it is to be meddled with at our peril. However, as I set out a few moments ago, commentators and others rarely look past that first paragraph of the preamble. And it's not just commentators who don't read it all. Economics guru Kate Raworth, who wrote Donut Economics, spoke passionately at our spring conference fringe meeting about the need to cut global CO2 emissions. But before she came, I learned through our contacts that she was planning to be quite critical of Liberal Democrats in the meeting because, and I quote, "we didn't appear to have a strong environmental statement in the preamble." However, I was able to point to the sentence we had inserted in 1988, languishing unseen at the end of the second paragraph. It was a sentence which I had written on a scrap of lined paper and handed in haste to our sadly missed friend Tony Greaves, as he was chasing about collecting extra bits from interest groups who were meeting in scattered rooms across the venue. That sentence read as follows: "We believe that each generation is responsible for the fate of our planet, and by safeguarding the balance of nature and the environment, for the long-term continuity of life in all its forms." This constitutional motion, therefore, is about perceptions. We're not changing the preamble content in any fundamental way. It's like sending an old dust-covered, darkened portrait for artistic restoration. We have to wipe away years of accumulated grime and reveal its true, vibrant green colour, effectively for the first time in over 33 years. We want to promote our long-held environmental credentials to be the equal of liberty, equality and community. I commend this motion to you.
Thank you very much, Keith. Could I ask Catherine Pinder to stand by? And I now call Duncan Bragg. Duncan.
Thank you very much, Cara. Conference, I was part of the FPC group that wrote the paper What Liberal Democrats Believe that you voted for yesterday. And that paper includes environmentalism as one of the party's core values. But in fact, we had a debate about whether it really is a core value or whether it's just an important set of policies that are necessary in order to achieve the other values we identified. And it certainly is that. The chances of achieving liberty, for example, the opportunity for people to live their lives in the way they wish, will steadily shrink unless we are able effectively to tackle nature and climate emergencies. There is little doubt that environmental breakdown will make it more difficult to achieve equality. As one of the speakers said in the climate debate on Saturday, climate change will trigger 3 policy responses: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. And it's the poorest individuals and communities and nations who are those least able to adapt to the impacts of climate change and the most likely to suffer. Democracy itself will struggle. Taking the ever more urgent action necessary to cope with the nature and climate emergencies will test the limits of democratic consent, and populist climate deniers will take every opportunity to claim that the unpopular measures that democratic governments will be forced to take sometimes would not be needed if people only listened to them. Our belief in decentralizing power to communities should reap dividends in liberating the imagination and efforts of ordinary people to deal with the climate and nature emergencies, but seem less likely to happen as governments centralize power to cope with these impacts. And similarly, internationalism ought to be encouraged, but is more likely to come under threat as the impacts of climate breakdown spread from nation to nation, for example, through the rapid growth in the number of refugees fleeing environmental devastation. So an environmental approach is clearly necessary to realise our other core values: liberty, equality, democracy, human rights, community and internationalism. This is true for us living today. It is even more true for future generations, which we believe have the same rights as we do to live their lives in the way they choose. But in the end, we concluded that environmentalism is more than that. It is a way of looking at the world, a manner of valuing the beauty and diversity of the natural environment as a good in itself, not just as a way of achieving other outcomes. All political philosophies possess a view of human nature. The liberal view includes the optimistic belief that societies that live in harmony with the natural world are healthier and happier than those that do not. So it is right to identify environmentalism as a core value in and by itself. This was, of course, just as true in 1988 when the current preamble was written, but the scale and urgency of the nature and climate emergencies has grown beyond what anyone envisaged back then. It's right to highlight that. It's right to change the preamble in the way in which this constitutional amendment proposes, and that's why I hope you will all vote for it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Could I ask Steve Bolter to stand by? And I now call Catherine Pinder.
Hello, everyone. I'm perfectly happy with this bringing of environmentalism into the preamble. I understand that taken from the second paragraph to the first is your aim, and that seems a good idea. Only Duncan has just mentioned all the core values that are mentioned in what Liberals believed in F22. And I have been trying to find in the preamble where these other values may be found. And in fact, in this second, the long paragraph of the preamble, which I'm not surprised most of us don't normally read, there are indeed mentions of several of those core values. The ones that are also mentioned are human rights, the new one that we've added, and also, I think, community and internationalism, all brought into this enormous paragraph, which I think we would do better to change and add to in future if we could, rather than leave it. It's a very long and comprehensive and difficult to take in paragraph. So you are suggesting moving the environmentalism to the first paragraph, and that is in fact the seventh of the core values that were decided in F22 what Liberal Democrats believe. So my request really is that we should look again at the long second paragraph of the preamble at some point and mention other values that are there. And my second point concerns this key value statement where you bring in the concept of well-being, which is a health issue, which I'm glad to see dwelt on, but I think it could be expanded, actually. Again, I would ask for further work to be done on this. We want to, you say, we enable people to thrive in their communities, assessing progress by measuring well-being. And this relates to so much of health, which we do cover elsewhere. In our evaluation, in F22, when I proposed this, we said that equality that equality included no one being held back by poverty, poor health, or discrimination. And I think it would be a great idea if you expanded well-being in another time to include poverty, health, as you are doing, it's obvious part of well-being, poverty, health, and discrimination. I think that would greatly enrich the Constitution and make, and in some way, revise the second paragraph.
Could you bring your remarks to a close now, please?
That would be helpful to put this in the third as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Could I ask Steve Mason to stand by? And I now call Steve Bolter.
Hello, this is Steve Bolter here from Braintree and Whittam and from GLD. Hello, this is Steve Bolter here. I am a member of Braintree and Whittam local party and a member of GLD, and I want to support the proposals in this amendment. The first thing I'd like to say is that a couple of years ago there was a school strike and Extinction Rebellion combined demonstration, very peaceful one, in Bury St Edmunds, and I went along. And at the end, I was offered the microphone. And I thanked people for raising the awareness of the problem and said how much easier it made it for politicians to actually act on it. And of course, they thought I was from the Green Party. They were astounded that I was from the Liberal Democrats. They just didn't know that Liberal Democrats stood for green things. So actually putting the section defining what we stand for, about us keeping about working for to make sure that we give the next generation the facilities that we had unspoilt is very important. Getting that right in where it's noticed. The preamble a few years ago became very much bigger and more complicated, and things just got lost. It is important that real core values are right up the front there, where the press and the commentators spot it. On the well-being business, I would just like to say that when we're talking about well-being, we're not talking about a narrow well-being defined by health or anything of the sort. What we are trying to say is that how well off people feel do not depend on the gross national product of the nation. There can be very large GDPs with very, very few people actually living comfortably. There are very poor GDP countries where people can live comfortably even if they're on a modest income. And so it is taking away the emphasis from gross national product to actually making things good for people's well-being. It's not just about health at all. It's very much more general than that. Thank you very much. Please support the amendment.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I now call Steve Mason. And could I ask Oliver Jones-Lyon to stand by? Steve.
Good afternoon, conference. I've been a member of the party since 2015, and I joined in the dismay after the election loss, and I wanted to help build the party back up again. Though I have voted Lib Dem for as long as I can remember, which is quite a long time now. I'm now a Lib Dem councillor up in Yorkshire, in Rydale, and I'm a very, very keen involvement in environmental issues. I'll keep this brief and put slightly different slant in it a little bit. But for me, this adjustment to the preamble is an obvious reflection of where the party is now and where we're going into the future. Over the past few years, I've worked with many members of the party at all levels to bring green issues to the fore and to help support policy development. And I truly believe the Lib Dem way is the best way to tackle climate change and particularly biodiversity loss. We know what we stand for: liberty, equality and community at the very heart of our purpose. But those qualities in the 21st century must also encompass how we deliver better for both people and planet. A greener future can provide a more equal society and lift many into a world that can thrive. For me, the preamble of the Constitution not only represents the foundations of our collective values, but it also represents our vision, and our vision for a world where people and planet can thrive together. That vision should represent all our aspirations and deliver environmental change as well as social change. We live in a world of memes and headlines, a world where media attention lasts only seconds and impact statements are key. This is a great impact statement for us to create and use widely. If this motion gets accepted, I, for one, will be using on all my election materials, wherever I can and within the local party area. I wholeheartedly support this motion and hope conference agrees. Please vote for it.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I now ask Oliver Jones-Lyon to summate the motion.
As this will be my final speech to this conference, I just want to remark on what an absolutely brilliant conference this has been. We have reaffirmed our values, had fierce and thorough debates on pertinent issues of our time, and set out a strategy that will deliver that fairer, greener, more caring society that we keep talking about. This amendment, the preamble, continues upon that trend. Conference, it wouldn't be a speech from me without some form of eccentric analogy or visualisation, and I won't let you down on this final day. This conference has been all about what we will give our voters. Our values and themes are almost like a gift box. Our brilliant policies, the gift inside. And we have the strategy of how to deliver it to voters. So where does this amendment come in within this analogy? And where does it fit in? This amendment, the preamble, is the bow that brings it all together and makes it all the more attractive and, importantly, distinctive to open up. I'd like to say thank you to Keith, the Green Lib Dem exec and officers, and the GLD Wellbeing Special Interest Group for all of their work in drafting this amendment, making it as excellent as it is. I'd also like to give my thanks to Pippa Halings, who was unable to speak today. She's a formidable voice on green issues in our party and in local government, and it is my sincere hope that one day that voice may be heard in Parliament in an enlarged Liberal Democrat caucus. Thank you, Duncan, also for pointing out the interoperability of our green credentials and the importance of delivering green solutions to ensure we can deliver that liberal society. Thank you, Catherine, for your remarks. Wellbeing brings together all the things you mentioned, as Steve Boulder referenced, and that's why we must pass this amendment today. And thank you finally, Steve, for your remarks and work. The Liberal Democrats have the best credentials and policy of any party in the UK. We have a leader who is credible with his extensive experience in the area, and we have extensive records of action across local government. As the climate emergency worsens, and as the party seeks to target young professionals increasingly worried about the impact we are having on the environment around us, it is absolutely time that we now promote that sentence to the first paragraph. But putting those principles into action is where well-being comes in. This conference, we have talked about building a fairer, greener, more caring society. Caring societies have well-being economies. They care for the well-being of their people, not solely the number on those economic stats. Well-being economies are stronger economies, with the higher productivity which Britain sorely needs due to their investment in their green economies, mental health, and the education of their workers, rather than investment into the hands of their cronies, as we have seen with this government. These are also, may I know, exactly the things that resonate with that constituency of young professionals we are targeting. Conference, a fairer, greener, more caring society is a society with a well-being economy, and it's time we make that environmentalism a central part of every speech we give, every policy we pass, and every campaign we run. That's why, conference, I implore you for the final time this conference to back this amendment. Let's make sure that voters get that bow.
Thank you very much, Oliver. So we now move to the vote on this constitutional amendment, and that will open up now. So we now have the results of that vote, and it is clearly carried by 183 votes to 24 against. That well exceeds the 2/3 majority that is required for a constitutional amendment. So I'd like to say thanks to my aides, John Ball and Nick DaCosta, on these two motions, and I'm now handing over to Beck Scott, who will be chairing the next constitutional amendment, and that's F42. Thank you.
Welcome back, conference. Since we are running slightly behind, we will move straight to the proposer of F42, updating the Constitution's language on equality and inclusion. Could I ask Kim Bailey to stand by and ask George Potter to propose the motion, please?
Good afternoon, conference. Thank you for taking the time to join us on a Monday afternoon. We are running short of time, so I won't use my full time. This is a very simple constitutional amendment, which is essentially just a piece of good housekeeping. There are two parts to this amendment. In the first part, where the preamble to the Constitution talks about opposing discrimination on the grounds of various characteristics, we wish to replace the word colour with ethnicity, and other than that, we want to add the words caste, class, gender. Caste, class, and gender to the and belief to the list of characteristics on which we oppose discrimination. It's a simple update to bring language written in the 80s up to date for the 21st century. Similarly, at the end of the preamble, where we say we are an organisation of women and men working towards these aims, we want to replace that with we're an organisation of people working towards these aims. The second part of a constitutional amendment is to replace the words he or she with they, and where his or her we should replace with their. That is effectively it. So we are just making that's language which already exists in some parts of the Constitution. We are merely seeking to make it consistently gender neutral throughout. Please also note that there is a drafting amendment we have made which is simply where we have religion in the original constitutional amendment, we've changed that to be religion or belief to take account of views such as humanism, which are akin to religion in some ways, but are by definition not religious beliefs, but are still worthy of protection and protection from discrimination. It's a really simple amendment, conference. I really hope you can support it. There's also Amendment 1, which proposes adding the word heritage to our constitutional amendment. As mover of this motion, I am very open-minded about that. I'd be interested to hear in the debate how the movers of that amendment define heritage and how they think it should be interpreted. But I'm completely open-minded, and we're definitely not opposing or favouring that amendment. We're just completely neutral on it. Thank you for your time. This is really simple. It's really common sense. Please, conference, support this constitutional amendment, and let's make our preamble up to date and inclusive for the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We now come on to the mover of Amendment 1, Kim Bailey, and could I ask Sarah Hodgkinson to stand by?
Good afternoon, conference. My name's Kim Bailey. I joined in 2016, and I'm a local councillor now in Kingston upon Thames. I looked at this with interest, and I just thought it might be an opportune moment to include heritage, and I'll give the reasons. I've put forward this motion to include into the language of the Constitution because I believe it will add a much needed nuance to how we talk about people who make up this country and bring our Constitution into the modern age. The country is changing fast. When the results of the next census in the next year, experts predict that the mixed ethnic category will be the largest group. Yet the way we talk about people with diverse roots is inaccurate and old-fashioned. This is particularly true for second and third generation immigrants who make up a lot of our populace now. Personally, I was born in Britain with a German mother and an Indo-Caribbean father, but I don't identify by my colour, race, or ethnicity, but my heritage, and that includes London being the place of my birth. Although my particular backstory is my own, the same principle applies to many others in my ward as well as the country. And our diverse background should bring us together, not separate us. The feeling of belonging is widely acknowledged as being a fundamental human need, and I'm particularly interested in the research that shows that students who feel that they belong have put more emphasis on their work and have a higher self-esteem. Apologies, I have a cuckoo clock, which is part of my mixed heritage. I'm just going to mute for 2 seconds.
Kim, you're still on mute, I'm afraid.
Okay, apologies for that. So really, that's really what I want to say. I think that by inserting the word heritage, we have the opportunity to as the proposer was saying, to just update the language a little bit, and to be a forward-looking and inclusive party by updating the language. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. And Kim was a first-time speaker at conference. Could I now ask Toby Keynes to stand by? And I call Sarah Hodgkinson to speak in favour of the motion. Sarah.
Hello, conference. I support this entire motion, but I want to speak about lines 6 to 9 in particular, because that's where I can bring my personal knowledge and experiences to bear. By way of gender identity, I am a non-binary trans woman. By way of profession, I am a linguist and an editor. So from that background, I have 2 arguments in favor of these specific lines. I have an argument of inclusion and one of linguistics. So first and surely most importantly on inclusion, I want to tell you, conference, when I looked at the agenda and I saw this change proposed, it really warmed my heart, because when we broaden the scope of our language like this, we are telling people who don't belong to either of the binary genders that they belong here, that they have equal standing and respect to anyone else in this party. That is a thoroughly liberal value, and I think it's absolutely essential that our party constitution reflects that value. And my second argument is a lot more technical, but I hope it might persuade anyone who is still on the fence about this for any reason. People will sometimes try to argue against introduction of gender-neutral language and the singular they in particular on the grounds of it being some kind of new form of speech. Actually, there's nothing wrong with language changing over time. I think it's great, but for what it's worth, we have documented evidence of the singular they being in use since at least the 14th century. So this is not some radical new concept being imposed on our language. It's just a well-established, much neater and more fluent option than writing he or she all the time. And likewise, instead of women and men, we can just say people. It's just a better way to write. So in my day job, I absolutely love making language more inclusive in this way. That's very nerdy of me, but I think it's probably also very Lib Dem. At conference, this party has taken big steps in recent years to become more actively inclusive. There is more to be done. There always is, but we can take another step now by passing this motion. Thank you.
Probably should move straight to. Sorry, I now ask Fraser Graham to stand by to summate the motion, and I call Toby Keynes to speak. Toby?
Thank you, Conference. I'd like to start by thanking George and Fraser for putting this motion before you, and I'm particularly grateful to them for addressing caste discrimination, which is just as nasty and unpleasant as race discrimination, but it's far less visible to most of us because it only happens within and between certain minority communities. It's not covered effectively by existing equalities law, and the Conservatives seem determined to keep it that way. Our party challenges this at Westminster, and it's about time our Constitution also challenged it. Our own amendment, which is now part of the motion, changes the word religion to religion or belief. And this is, with respect to George, considerably more than just housekeeping. Nobody should suffer from prejudice or discrimination because of their religious belief or their non-religious belief. In most countries where people who hold the wrong religious beliefs are constantly in danger of being attacked, persecuted, imprisoned, even executed or murdered by mobs, those people whose beliefs are not religious are just as much in danger. That's especially true in the many countries where the dominant religion outlaws apostasy. If you've been born into that religion, abandoning it or questioning it is likely to put your freedoms and even your life in danger. And even here, our laws specifically discriminate against the non-religious, although not to such lethal effect. It seems incredible in this day and age that a humanist couple cannot get married in a ceremony that reflects their beliefs just because humanism is not a religion. Passing this motion will mean that the Constitution finally recognises that we all deserve the same protections, whether our beliefs are religious or non-religious. This motion may be short, and the amendment even shorter, but it carries huge symbolic importance. Please support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toby. And I'll call Fraser Graham to summate the motion. Fraser?
Hi. Much like everyone else here, this is such a short amendment. I'm going to keep my speech quite brief as well. I want to thank everyone who's spoken on this. Thanks to Kim for moving the amendment, especially as a first-time speaker. You were fantastic. I very much appreciated your cooking clock and was sad not to get to hear the full length of it. But having heard her argument, I welcome the addition of Amendment 1 and commend people to vote for it. I think it's a very sensible addition to this. I want to thank Sarah, who honoured us with their own experience on this topic. It's for people like Sarah that I was so glad that George asked me to submit this amendment. So I'm glad to see that Sarah's had the opportunity to speak on this. I also want to thank Toby for just outlining the importance of including both caste and belief into this amendment. You know, I'm not going to really say much more because I don't feel I need to. This is such a simple thing to do. It's going to mean so much to so many people. So please, conference, just do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fraser. We now move on to a series of 2 votes. Firstly, we will be voting on whether to accept the amendment to the constitutional amendment. This only requires 50% to pass, and following that, we will be voting on the constitutional amendment as a whole. John, could you launch the vote, please? Thank you, Conference. We had 173 votes in favour of that amendment and 14 against, so that amendment has clearly passed. We will now move to a vote on the constitutional amendment as amended. As a reminder, this needs 2/3 to pass. John, could you launch the vote, please? Thank you, Conference. With 190 votes in favour and 11 votes against, that constitutional amendment has very clearly carried. I will now hand over to Wendy Chamberlain MP in order to introduce our next item.
I'm James, and this is Ella, and we are here in sunny St. Louis, Missouri, campaigning for Brits abroad. And you can join us. Come on, it'll be fun.
Welcome to the Liberal Democrats abroad.
I'm Tom McAdam, Chair of the Lib Dems in Europe local party.
I'm Kate Brain. I'm Chair of Lib Dems in France.
And I'm George Cunningham, Chair of Lib Dems Overseas Local Party. And let's tell you what we're all about.
We're campaigning for British nationals in Europe and around the world.
We're the only party that has representation in Parliament for Brits living abroad.
In the House of Lords, whether you live in Europe or overseas, we'll look after your interests.
We're supporting British and European businesses, working together to overcome the Brexit hurdles they face.
Our scientists and engineers are world class, and we want to see them collaborating with our European friends to develop clean and green technologies.
We're campaigning for the rights of UK citizens living in Europe to be restored and not further eroded.
Our campaign is succeeding to give the vote to every Brit abroad. Now we need to make sure that we can vote again, so that our votes are counted in every general election and referendum.
Campaigning for overseas constituencies, so that your voice, our voice, can be properly heard in the House of Commons.
Real democratic representation is a human right.
No matter where we live, campaigning for equal access to COVID vaccines.
500,000 pensioners abroad have been abandoned with their pensions frozen. We are working to put that right.
We want the Foreign Office to look after the rights of Brits abroad properly. We aim to make that happen.
We are concerned about the threats to democracy, human rights and liberalism.
In Hong Kong, there are hundreds of Lib Dem members, supporters and sympathisers. We need to do our best to support them.
Working in hotspots like Afghanistan, alleviating the suffering of ordinary people.
We're 2,000 members in 70 countries, making a difference.
So come to our stand and let's talk about the issues facing Brits abroad.
Have a great day!
Hello, conference, and welcome back. We've had a slight technical hitch in getting the Alex Cole-Hampton speech for you, so we're going to have to change the order of business slightly and move on to the next item, which is F44. To do that, we will need your approval in a vote to change the order of business, so that vote will be appearing now. And welcome back, conference. Thank you for that. We have approval to change the order of business and go straight to item F44. We will get that speech to you from Alex Cole-Hampton when we can. So this is debate F44, rebuilding our cultural, artistic and educational ties with Europe. And I would like to ask Peter Burke to stand by. And I call to move Layla Moran, MP for Oxford West and Abington. Layla.
Good afternoon, conference. And it's fitting that as conference draws to a close, we have before us a motion which has cultural exchange and educational links at its heart, because of course we know usually the final afternoon of conference is the warm-up before the ultimate Lib Dem cultural experience, Glee. But I think it's fair to say, for those who haven't been, it's also pretty educational too. And it's sad we don't have it this year. But when we finally do get to meet in person once again, I am sure that we will be singing songs about an unlikely partnership with a superstar who joined forces with us to help take on this government over Brexit. And no, I am not talking about Gina Miller. I am, of course, talking about Sir Elton John, because it was his intervention that put our campaign to ensure that musicians and their support teams can travel paperwork-free around Europe on the nation's front pages. A campaign organised by some of our fantastic peers, such as Paul Strasberger, and supported by a veritable who's who of the music scene, from Liam Gallagher to, rather impossibly, Brexiteer supporter Roger Daltrey. And today's motion reaffirms their call. What unites them is that this red tape that is strangling the new generation of musicians that don't have the same financial resources as those who came before them to tour around Europe. It could be curtains for their careers unless we help them. And that could mean missing out on that next Elton John, the next Ed Sheeran, or the next Adele. Now, I don't know what Elton John's political leanings are, but I can tell you that I take great inspiration from his work, from his general like of the colour yellow, Watford FC, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, to the healthy dose of liberal optimism present in songs like I'm Still Standing. But Elton is right. While it might feel like it's going to be a long, long time before we reverse the damage that leaving the EU has done, that doesn't stop us from holding the government to account for its failed trade agreement now. And we must always remember that in Europe, there is more to see than can ever be seen and more to do than can ever be done. You see, conference, we must never undervalue the incredible cultural opportunities on our doorstep. We had the chance to live, love and work and study in 27 different countries, but this government wants to make it so hard to travel there that you're going to need a rocket, man. And they won't admit they've made a mistake, because for Boris Johnson, sorry seems to be the hardest word. I'm going to stop now. I do apologize. But listen, it is serious. And why we have been advocating alongside Elton for reversing this damage is, I would hope, self-evident. So we are calling for paperwork-free travel for artists, so that whether you're a singer, a dancer, part of their support staff, you can tour easily in Europe, and European artists can tour there too. We want to rejoin the Erasmus Plus scheme. And in the interim, let's call on the UK government to enact the reforms to the Turing scheme that Kirsty Williams secured in Wales when she was Education Secretary. We would scrap the requirement for school trips to and from Europe to require passports and visas to ensure teachers are still able to take students abroad for important and unforgettable educational and cultural opportunities. And we would expand the Youth Mobility Scheme to EU countries on a reciprocal basis and slash the costs currently attached to the scheme so that young people can once again go on and have that gap year, learn that language, or indeed meet their partner. In fact, it could even solve the social care crisis. We've heard from the government's own Migration Advisory Committee that extending the Youth Mobility Scheme would help plug a looming shortage of workers in social care. So I hope the government will listen to simply its own advice. And finally, we would set up a European cultural fund so people from all backgrounds can make the most of the opportunities which our close relationship with our EU friends and neighbours can and should bring. Conference, regardless of how people voted in 2016, no one thought that they were voting for a future where Britain was worse off. Our young people were less able to thrive, and our cultural industries were facing a crisis. The government may not see the cost of eroding links with Europe, but we do. And we want to preserve that experience for millions of people up and down the country. Conference, I urge you, please pass this motion today.
Thank you, Layla. Thank you so much. I was trying to work out how to get a rocket man into this link, but then you beat me to it, so we'll have to do without. Can I ask Julie Adams-Hatch to stand by, please? And I now call Peter Burke from South East Oxfordshire. Go ahead, please. You're muted, possibly?
Thank you. Very well spoken, Layla. Conference. I want to support this motion with all my heart. Two themes, really, I think, arising from this. One is cabotage, of which we'll hear later, no doubt, and sabotage, of which I want to speak a little bit today. Most of you will have seen Elton John making a heartfelt and emotional plea for common sense, talking to Michel Barnier. And Michel Barnier, sadly and disappointingly, responded in a way that I suppose he had to, which was with rather cold, detached common sense and terseness. Not his fault. His irritation with the antics of this government was all too obvious. The TCA last December led to a qualified limitation on tariffs, although less so perhaps than we had hoped, but really very little else. In many ways, it showed this government wanted to distance itself gratuitously from Europe. And the Europeans said at the time that they'd offered some concessions, and these weren't taken up. Why? Well, frankly, I think the best explanation that Lord David Peter Max Frost could give us was it was about sovereignty and people had voted for that. What nonsense. The decision to walk away from Erasmus Plus was a direct breach of promises given only a few months earlier by the Prime Minister. We know that Turing is no substitute, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that in a moment. I'm quite certain if Alan Turing had heard what was being done in his name, he would now be turning in his grave. All the closest and most accessible partner countries from the point of view of students happen to be in the EU. Replacing student exchanges under the aegis of Erasmus with others further away is quite clearly just going to make them less available to any but the most wealthy. It's quite clear the Tories don't feel any remorse about making this into an elitist scheme. In fact, they probably wouldn't understand that that's what it is. Another and unnecessary yawning back gap in the TCA is the absence of any provision for mutual recognition of professional qualifications. So not just musicians, but people like architects and engineers who work in the EU for part of their livelihood will be severely disadvantaged. It'll be so much more difficult because of limited work opportunities in the EU to persuade British students to study modern languages, something which is already in decline. A whole generation will grow up without the sense of being European, and their sense of Europeanness has been deliberately sabotaged by this government, hence my opening remarks. Whenever challenged, the government tries to pretend it's all mandated by the referendum, that people really wanted to end free movement. Were they told this would be primarily an end to free movement for themselves? Most people living in Europe west of Belarus have the right to travel and work freely in 31 countries. I'm lucky I have 32 to choose from because I'm Irish. But for British people, the choice is now limited to two, your country and mine. British people made that decision, but was that an informed choice? I ask you to decide that question. I ask you, in the name of the people who are severely suffering as a result of all this, to support this motion wholeheartedly. I think the Liberal Democrat Party is the last bastion of pro-Europeanness. Labour Party has let us down. I would very much hope that if any of you have attempted to say the words, "We're not a rejoined party," that you will think again. Support the motion, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Can I ask David Chalmers to stand up by, please? And I now call Julie Adams-Hatch from North Devon. Julie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, conference. I've always been creative. You probably can see behind me. Enjoying design, art, music and performance in all their guises. And I have been a further education college lecturer. I've been heartbroken by the cost of COVID-19 on our access to all of that. Brexit has caused the loss of access to Erasmus+, and this is a major blow to our young people. Again, the devastating effect is the greatest for our lowest income families. I know as a parent just how hard it is to not be able to financially support our young adults into their future desires and development. This government's alternative is not fit for purpose, making it especially hard for lower income families, as usual. I have friends in the world of performing arts, some of whom are now starting out on their personal development and journeys. The majority do not have substantial financial resources to support their aspirations. They are working multiple jobs, usually part-time and insecure, and taking performance opportunities wherever and whenever they can. This country is still in turmoil from the misery of COVID-19, with so many firms closing and loss of jobs. The UK still just about holds on to its global reputation as a place of performing arts excellence at all levels, not least of which are the unseen workers and support companies who set up, provision, feed and advertise the various types of performance and exhibitions. Now add the mess that Brexit has wrought, and we can see the costs, documentation and myriad regulations causing a constant reduction or cancelling of events anywhere in Europe. We are at serious risk of losing employment, opportunities, reputation, businesses and fun. We need fun and release more now than at any other time. No escapism, art, performance, fun equals no relief from the pressures of our current daily lives. Mental health has and will continue to suffer. Conference, please support this motion.
Thank you, Julie. Can I ask Jacqueline Bell to stand by, please? And now I call David Chalmers from Torrington, West Devon. David.
Good afternoon, Conference. It's always good to follow on from my neighbour across the River Torridge, Julie. I'm the chair of the Liberal Democrat European Group, and we wholeheartedly support this motion and urge Conference to support it in its entirety. As you are aware, the last two conferences, we've discussed Europe, and there has been motions sort of instructing the FPC to set out a roadmap on the path for us to rejoin the EU. And this motion, along with the other motions that we had earlier in conference on supply chains and international trade, are part of that. The European Group over the next month is actually putting together a series of regional events called the Conference on the Future of Europe, culminating on an all-day conference on the 30th of October, which will be part of this and allow you and allow the party to have its voice on our future relationship with the EU. Now, as I said, I really support this motion in its entirety, but there's a couple of points that I would like to really focus on. One of them is I was a language student. I studied German, I went to university in Germany and I went to school there. It transformed my life, and I really welcome how the emphasis we place upon the importance of languages in our education system. I'm also the governor of the Further Education College here in North Devon, Petrock College. And I know firsthand, and this is something that we need to remember about Erasmus, that it wasn't just about connecting students, university students. It's about further education as well. Young people of 16 and 18, many of them from my college, for the first time in their lives, went over and took part in Erasmus and went to places overseas for 2 or 3 weeks. They came back transformed. It was the first time in their lives that they'd actually been abroad. I saw it in my own eyes. I saw the pride in their parents. In an area of mine, a lot of social deprivation, very rural and far from London. This is really important. And I think that we need to stress this. Erasmus is for students across the board, and the touring really doesn't go far enough at all to make up for the loss of Erasmus. The twinning association, twinning area, I also wanted to bring forward because I think that is really important for us and the groups as a party and our connections that we have with local councils. We've seen that in the programme that we've put forward, the campaign to support LGBT rights in Poland, Protect Our Twins. And I would really welcome us developing those links between towns in this country and those across Europe, especially now that we're outside of the EU. Those links are even more important than ever. And that also means that we, where we have strength in our local councils, will be able to extend those cultural links as well. So really what I wanted to say is just to sum up, really do support this. I think this is a fantastic motion. It shows who we are as Lib Dems, that we are prepared to stand up for our young people and their opportunities and develop those links that are so important for us, that enrich our society. So support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Can I ask Steve Bolter to stand by, please? And I now call Jacqueline Bell from North Edinburgh, East and Leith. Jacqueline.
Conference. For centuries, the value of educational work and cultural links with Europe have been known. The Grand Tour, Hanseatic League, university studies by medieval scholars, our best dancers and instrumentalists working in our European companies. Brexit's wrecked that. Red tape or exclusion from applications thwarts chances to explore Europe and collaborate with our nearest neighbours. Only today, news that British passport holders cannot apply to be TUI holiday reps. Last month, a Brit before me in the Riga airport queue was phoning a friend for details of where they were staying to gain entry to Latvia. Not needed before. Erasmus was great. My husband works in landscape architecture departments in Edinburgh and Tartu, Estonia, where he is chair professor. This year, Edinburgh has no European students. Meanwhile, Tartu has a wide variety, an opportunity to make friendships, study together. The touring scheme is restricted. It doesn't pay for visas, travel costs, or living expenses. It discriminates against the less well-off. Students seeking to study in Spain this year have been thwarted by the cost and slow visa process. The SNP see the loss of Erasmus as another reason for independence. Scotland, back in Europe, will rejoin Erasmus. Europe brought research opportunities. My husband's Tartu department has collaborated in many EU-funded projects. Most recently, Blue Health, a Horizon 2020 project, involved a wide variety of parties, including Exeter University, as well as research. Practical work included an open-air performance space at Plymouth Hoe. The research itself was COVID timely, looking at the benefits of blue spaces, that's oceans and watercourses, for physical and mental well-being. It even saw coverage in the women's magazine Red. Again, Brexit has pulled the plug and made it harder for academics to cross borders for employment and research collaboration. Wider communities have also benefited from cultural ties. Dunbarton district, where I live, has been twinned with Lignières in France for over 40 years. Lasting friendships have been formed, and all ages have been able to take part in reciprocal visits. Things have got harder over the years. East Lothian, being cash-strapped, stopped general grants and has refused to pay the costs of police checks for host families taking under 16s. But the committee's been forced to fundraise, not easy in contrast. In contrast, the French Jumelage has significant grants and local authority support. School exchanges have been replaced by reciprocal scholarships, opportunities for students from either side to stay with families, have work experience, and an opportunity for language immersion. We've also had bigger trips for adult groups. Our choir was sung in Bruges Cathedral. We've been able to sample wine and cheese, historic sites and culture, and the French have been able to sample haggis and our local history. The 40th anniversary 2 years ago was a celebration of ceilidh dancing, food and music. Conference.
Can you draw in to a close, please?
Yes, again, Brexit is a self-inflicted wound. Culturally and educationally, the UK is left isolated. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline. So I'm pleased to announce that Alex Cole-Hampton has been found and his speech will follow immediately after this item. Can I ask Fiona Hornby to stand by? And I now call Steve Bolter from Braintree and Witham. Steve.
Good afternoon. I am from, as I said, from Braintree and Witham, and I'm also a very active member of the Green Lib Dems. In 1956, I benefited from a life-informing school exchange with a German family. The German family I didn't understand actually which differences I was seeing were differences in status and differences in country. But I was staying in what I now know was a upper middle class, I suppose, German family in fallen circumstances. In fact, their father had been shot down by the British over Malta, and died, of course. The youngest person in the family, the same age as me, was actually born after he'd been shot down. And they were very cultured as well. And it was life reforming. It made me, at the age of 13, an enthusiast for bringing Europe together, and I remain that all these years later. In 1992, I was actually funded by that was an ordinary self-financed exchange organised by the school, of course, and of course it was very easy to organise in those days without a lot of bureaucracy. No checks on the hosts or anything. Anyway, to move on, in 1992, I was funded by the EU to spend 20 days visiting schools and an FE college in Germany, comparing physics teaching in England and in two very different German states. And what I want to emphasize is that this motion must be about more than the arts. It claims to be culture, artistic and educational ties with Europe. Now, the evidence is very much on the artistic. It's almost as if other human endeavours are not part of our culture. It's as if science isn't part of our culture. And most of the examples quoted are on the arts. Well, certainly I enjoy arts and music, and I regularly used to visit a jazz club which would have artists popping across from Europe, either because they were British artists on tour in Europe and just coming back to fulfill a gig with us, or because they were artists that actually lived in Europe. There was one trio, one of my favourite trios, which had an English singer, an Italian pianist, and a German clarinet player. So, and these sort of things are much more difficult to organise now. But what I really want to say is that we must think of culture as a whole and exchange visits and education as a whole, whether it's studying science education or whether it's studying languages. It all benefits from working together. And of course, our scientists are now very disabled by not being included in a lot of European projects. So please think beyond just the arts, all our culture, all our education, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you. So can I ask Robert Harrison to stand by to summate on the motion? And I now call Fiona Hornby from Devices. Fiona.
Good afternoon, conference. I'm speaking in favour of this motion and in particular about lines 81 to 84. Young people coming to this country to learn or improve their English, whether they come as part of a school party, to attend a language school, or in small individual groups, very often travel on their ID cards from a European country. To require these young people to have visas and passports will increase the cost of such visits and the complications of organising them. It is a real impediment for many. I know this because I have been teaching and organising such groups for many years. These students stay in host families, often with British youngsters. The usual pattern of these visits is lessons in the morning and local excursions in the afternoon, interspersed with days out visiting places further afield. Host families are encouraged to involve their young guests in evening and weekend family activities. These students mix with other British youngsters when they go out into the local community. They share ideas and opinions. They get to know us and we get to know them. We all discover the music, sports and culture that we share and those that are different. Having a French teenager teach you the difference between crepes and pancakes is enlightening, and hideous national stereotypes are banished. There is an economic benefit as well as a cultural one. Money is spent in the local community and visitor attraction numbers are increased. Everyone's horizons are expanded by contact with those who live in a different country and speak a different language. I had one young woman staying with me who wanted to train as a vet. She decided while staying that she would like to apply to a British veterinary college. Allowing some of the next generation of our voters to learn that their European neighbours are not so very different, and maybe persuading future European voters that it might be a good thing to encourage Britain to have closer links and to rejoin the EU is a universal good. Those of us who were lucky enough to have similar opportunities when we were younger had our attitudes to countries we visited changed forever. And this very often led to a lifelong exploration of these foreign places. Conference, this motion is about freedom of movement for young people in both directions and the benefits it brings both to the individual and the country as a whole. Please support this motion and let young people have the benefits their predecessors have had.
Thank you, Fiona. So I call Robert Harrison from Lib Dems in Europe to summate on the motion. Robert.
Thanks very much indeed, Conference, for taking this motion. Some of our speeches have been absolutely excellent during the time with their personal experiences. I'm not actually going to try and repeat as many Elton John song titles in my summation as Layla managed in her start. But I was indeed one of the people who've had the benefit of seeing young bands throughout Europe during my time living in the Netherlands and in Germany. Bands that I met in the Sheffield Octagon Centre and Sheffield pubs a few years earlier were able to go throughout Europe fairly inexpensively, play in local pubs throughout Europe, and actually promote, as it was called, Cool Britannia. That has stopped, as we've already heard. Peter Burke was fantastic when he talked about how important our Europeanness is and how important such exchanges through our young people, through our culture, have been in order to encourage this sense that young Britons, that in fact all Britons, are actually part of Europe and not an exclusive island off the coast of Europe. I thought Julie Adams-Hatch, my friend Julie, she was great when she said, we had fun. We had enormous fun. As a school student, we had an exchange with a French school. All they required was ID cards to come over. Not a problem. And we had great fun teaching them how to play cricket. And it was the first time I think I learned how to play pétanque when I went back to visit them. David Chalmers has also emphasised how important this is for further education students, the 16 to 18-year-olds in our society, as well as the younger people and our students. And that's why our motion actually calls for Erasmus Plus to be supported. Not just a Turing scheme that is geared up to university students, but to actually get school students, further education students, going across, and apprentices going across throughout Europe, as the Germans have done extremely successful. Jackie was fantastic when she talked about family stays. And it reminded me of a story that my German wife, has told me. Her first visit to the United Kingdom was at Eastbourne, learning English, in the school. And if you talk to people from Eastbourne, this whole network of young Germans, young French, young Scandinavians who used to regularly come to Eastbourne, to the various language schools. I know it's not just Eastbourne, it's Brighton and a few others, and many other places on the south coast as well as elsewhere. They provide an enormous economic boost to the city set, to these towns, these seaside towns. COVID has played a little role in stopping that. But even after COVID, we are not going to be able to have the number of young people coming over to learn English as we have done in the past. Because as Fiona has emphasised, the requirement to have passports instead of your ID card. ID card cost me 16 euros for my kids. A passport will cost me 100 euros for my German kids. They also have British nationality as well. And that is going to be extremely expensive. But also for school classes with non-EU citizens. Many German school classes have Turkish citizens in them. Turkish citizens require a full visa to come to the United Kingdom. How are those classes going to be able to come and do exchange visits in the future, even if they do have ID cards? And last of all, Steve, you're absolutely right. We don't necessarily, it's not just about culture. It's about arts and science. It's also about science as well. I'm pleased to hear that you're obviously a physics teacher, because my background is also in physics. And I also benefited from these links going abroad when I was just a student and when I was a school student. In 1956, going to Germany, that must have been a fantastic time learning about the German side of the Second World War. And indeed, I still benefited from that when I went over as a school student in the 1980s. And going around 1992 to talk around how physics teaching has changed, this difference within the various European countries, that benefits us all. That gives us all ideas. And if I talk to my German friends here, they have benefited from learning from English, British, Scottish, and Welsh visits as well. So, conference, I would urge you to actually support this motion as it stands. It's important for our young people, it's important for Britain, and it's important to make certain that our voice is still heard. Thank you, conference.
Thank you, Robert. So that concludes the debate. There are no amendments, so it's a simple vote for or against the motion. That vote should be visible to you now. So when you voted, I will come back with the result. And welcome back. So the result of that vote is 276 for and 0 against. I'm sorry for the mix-up earlier with the technical problems getting Alex Cole-Hamilton. That speech will follow this item immediately and before the next debate. So I look forward to that, and have a nice rest of the day. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, conference. Now, the 2011 Scottish parliamentary elections were devastating for the Scottish Liberal Democrats. It was our first election since we had entered coalition at a UK level with the Conservatives, and the Scottish electorate's views on that were clear. One candidate, Alex Cole-Hamilton, said that if his defeat was the price to be paid in order to end child detention, it was a price he was willing to pay with all his heart. Fast forward to 2016 Scottish Parliament elections, where after we have seen the Scottish independence referendum and a devastating general election result, reducing our representation at Westminster in Scotland to just 1. And the highlight of the 2016 campaign was not only retaining our 5 seats, but seeing constituency wins for Willie Rennie in North East Fife, and finally seeing Alex Cole-Hamilton elected in Edinburgh Western. And since that time, Alex has kept himself very busy. For those who know him, his energy and enthusiasm are boundless. And for me, who joined the party in 2015, his support has been invaluable. Now, at a federal party level, we have seen a number of leaders since I joined in 2015. But since 2011, our leader in Scotland has been the redoubtable Willie Rennie. Following the Scottish Parliament elections in May, Willie decided that now was the time, after a decade and 2 referendums and 3 general elections, was the time for him to move on. And I'm absolutely delighted to see that Alex Cole-Hamilton is the new leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and to introduce him to the wider Liberal Democrat family today. Thank you.
Conference, it is a tremendous honour for me to address you for the first time as the leader of our Scottish party. I'm conscious that today I'm actually addressing some of my own political heroes. I cannot overstate the sense of responsibility that I feel to those great Scottish Liberals on whose shoulders I stand, friends and mentors like Jim Wallace, Joe Swinson, and of course Charles Kennedy. But I would not be standing here, and I would not have a seat in the building behind me, were it not for Willie Rennie. With the most recognisable smile in Scottish politics, Willie has silenced any talk of our extinction in Scotland, and with record-breaking majorities in our constituencies, he has redefined the meaning of the word fortress. Willie, you are one of my best friends, and we will never be able to repay the debt that we owe you. Bobby Kennedy once said, "Fear not the path of truth for the lack of people walking on it." In recent times, it's felt like we've been walking a lonely road as Liberals in this country. We've suffered many setbacks and have had to work hard to regain trust and belief. But the one thing that has sustained us on that journey is the one thing that this country is crying out for, and that is hope. After everything we've been through, Scotland needs new hope right now. As a party, we deal in hope because it sustains us, because we see the best in things, in the people we live among and in the communities that we serve. I got into politics because people matter to me. Like everyone in our party, I am inspired and thrilled by the idea of community. When COVID hit, people didn't hunker down and padlock their doors. They came forward in their tens and thousands to volunteer at test centres, in key worker hubs, and to help those in need around them. Our movement is rooted in the hope and belief of what the word community can mean. Neighbours looking out for neighbours, sharing with each other, caring for each other. That is as important in our streets and in our towns as it is in this global village. And everywhere I look, there is a sense that people are remembering that about us. They understanding that when they put their trust and belief in the Liberal Democrats, they get a return on that investment for them and for their communities. And we prove time and again, door by door and street by street, that 1,000 seemingly tiny acts of public service can move a mountain of public opinion. Whisper it. But there's something in the air about our party, a growing sense of optimism and of confidence in opinion polls and in by-election results. From Chesham and Amersham to Wick in the northernmost tip of Scotland, we are winning again, and we are winning against the odds. It should give us all such hope, and my goodness, doesn't this country need a bit of that right now? After 2 of the hardest years that any of us have known, people are crying out for the hint of new possibility that as we come out of the pandemic, we could do things differently. And we need to do things differently because we cannot limit our ambition to going back to the way that things were. Long before we had heard of COVID-19, things were bad in Scotland. There were warning lights blinking across the dashboard of public policy. They remain unattended to. On the educational attainment gap, missed climate targets, record mental health weights on GRA reform, on the threadbare state of our police force. The measure of effective government is in the delivery of public services. That is never more true than in a time of national crisis. The pandemic demanded every ounce of government's attention. It also allowed ministers to set aside the hard stuff. Patients waiting in pain sent letters telling them that their treatment would start in 12 weeks, when in fact they would not be seen in 50. All of these things were matters of policy that presented a problem for the SNP, and so it used the COVID emergency to deflect and defer action on them. And yet, despite all that, on the eve of a deadly second wave, the First Minister found time and space for a bill about another independence referendum. Conference, there is a muscle memory to the politics of Scotland. Every election, we are told that every vote cast is either a mandate for another referendum or the only way of stopping it. This has become the full extent of public debate in our country, and people are suffering because of it. Progress is stifled by a clash of nationalisms, the Scottish nationalism of the SNP, but also the Brexit nationalism of Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. We are a people trapped between flags, between politicians who mythologise and pine for ancient nations and borders just at a time when the world has moved on and demands international cooperation. If this boils down to a choice between those two nationalisms, then everybody loses, and so I say enough. People ask me why, as Liberals and as Democrats, we continue to oppose a second independence referendum. I will tell you why. 2 reasons. Firstly, just as with the Vote Leave and the prospectus for Brexit, where the sum total of that offer was written on the side of a bus, the SNP are asking people to write a blank cheque, to take a leap in the dark. Nobody will tell us what currency we'll use or who will pay our pensions or the nature of the border at Berwick. Above all, we oppose it because the relentless constitutional drumbeat drowns out everything else. It holds us back. In Scotland today, if your daughter fell off her bike and broke her arm, you could reasonably expect her to be in plaster by the end of the day. But if she came to you with self-harming behaviour, then she will join the longest queue in the National Health Service. Conference, at this precise moment, well over 1,500 children are waiting more than a year for mental health treatment. It is a national outrage. Those statistics tarnish the record of any government, but what absolutely ruins it is the drug deaths emergency. Scotland has the worst drug mortality in the developed world. It is nearly 4 times the rate of England and Wales. Time and again, the SNP government have shown themselves unequal to the task of reducing this devastating problem in Scotland. In fact, 5 years ago, with rates still rising and records already mounting, Nicola Sturgeon saw fit to cut budgets to drug services by 22%, sending organisations to the wall and severing support. Last year, we posted a new grim record on drug deaths, triggering a ministerial reshuffle and the introduction of a dedicated post reporting directly to the First Minister. On her appointment, the new minister made it clear that first and foremost, we just need to stop people dying. She had both my agreement and support for that ambition. But 9 months later, people continue to die at the same rate as before. New statistics indicate that last year's terrible record will be matched again. The SNP claim that these deaths are a result of UK government policy, but this is a fallacy. If this were the fault of reserve powers or austerity, we would see the same rates of people dying on the streets of London as we see in Glasgow. We don't. Glasgow is 10 times worse. Conference, this is a particularly Scottish problem which now demands international attention. That is why this morning I have written to the Director General of the World Health Organization. asking him to mobilise and to send a task force of global experts on drug mortality to Scotland to help get this public health disaster under control. Conference, there is a new SNP Green coalition in government in Scotland, but their very first act was an illiberal one. Scotland is the first and possibly the only corner of these islands to undermine the basic right to medical privacy with the introduction of vaccine ID cards. But make no mistake, this new coalition is about one thing, and it's not the environment. Its central mission is a constitutional one, threatening to utterly consume the precious little time before our planet is irreparably damaged. So, Conference, it's up to the Scottish Liberal Democrats to provide hope for the climate emergency. We've won some of the toughest climate targets in the world. Those targets need now to be met, but that's something the Scottish Government has failed to do year after year, and it's not hard to see why. Take transport, where emissions haven't budged in 30 years. You can practically taste it in the air outside my constituency office, sitting as it does on one of the most polluted roads in the entire country. I hear people say they would drive an electric car if they could trust the charging network. So let's give government a real stake in making those chargers available and keeping them running. Let's insist new public sector vehicles are all electric. I hear people say cost is a barrier. Let's spread those costs so they are affordable with longer government-backed interest-free loans. That could be worth more than £100 a month to household budgets. And people need to trust that an EV can get them from A to B. So there should be a new entitlement to show what's possible. Take an EV for a spin for a weekend and the government will pick up the tab. Take one for a trip and folk won't look back. That's just the start. There's so much more to come because we need new hope for the climate emergency. In the run-up to COP26, I'll be laying out a range of new measures that we as Liberals want to see. Conference, Scotland is a beautiful and dynamic place to live. Our people are proud and our history is magnificent, but we have been subdued by the collapse of industry, by failing health and by ministerial disinterest. That is why Scotland is in such need of hope right now. It's time to show the people of this country what we as Liberals can do for them, because I am tired of fighting elections based on who we are not. So let me set out what we stand for. If you want a party that will fight the climate emergency with ferocity but without the baggage of nationalism, come with us. If you want to live in a country which offers the best education in the world, which values its carers and those they care for, come with us. If you want a party that stands unwaveringly for human rights at home and abroad, one that will stand up to state intrusion in your lives, come with us. If you're affected by the national mental health catastrophe, come with us. Come with us, and I promise you that Liberal Democrats in the villages and the towns of this country will show you the meaning of the word hope once again.
Good afternoon, Conference, and welcome again. We're going to try and get back on schedule, so if speakers in the next debate could be as brief and precise as possible, that will help us indeed. You'll find F45, Keeping People Safe from Fraud and Scams, on page 114 of the agenda, and there is one amendment which can be found on page 114A. I now ask Councillor Heather Kidd to stand by and call on Baroness Sarah Ludford to propose the motion.
The usual problem. I was unmuted and then I was muted, now I'm unmuted again, hopefully. Conference, I'm pleased to be proposing this motion to you today. The justice portfolio in government is seen as not very important by them, and thus was classified as a demotion in last week's reshuffle. But in a report published last month, Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary said fraud victims were being denied the justice they deserved, that police forces were wrongly dismissing fraud as a low-impact victimless crime, and that it had too few officers and too few investigations allocated to it. Perhaps if this government devoted a little more attention to justice and a little less to proclaiming freedom from the EU, on which Liz Truss spouted yet more nonsense yesterday, then we would all benefit. 700,000 fraud offences were reported to the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau last year, representing 13% of all recorded crime. But this is reckoned to be only a fraction of the estimated 3.7 billion actually experienced. It is reckoned that soon 1 in 10 of us will be a victim of a fraud scam in what has been described as a tsunami. Victims are not bothering to report it to the police, partly because they know the perpetrators will not be pursued. The policing inspector was in fact none too impressed by the lackadaisical performance of Action Fraud, the police clearing hub, which is very hard to get through to, let alone get any response from. It's clear the police and courts need more resources, and Priti Patel and Dominic Raab need to persuade the Chancellor of that. They should seek to get back as much European law enforcement cooperation as is possible under their hopelessly inadequate Brexit deal. If Mr. Raab fails on all that as much as he failed as Foreign Secretary, with his approach which was laid back, literally, then I know a woman called Monica Harding who will have his scalp in Esher and Walton. The fact is that the perception of the victim of fraud as an old lady, someone like me, is not only prejudiced but misguided. Most victims are younger people, perhaps because they use websites, social media, texts, and emails more. As one money expert wrote, the pandemic has been like Christmas for criminals. And these people are very inventive entrepreneurs. So we may not get a turkey, thanks to Johnson's Brexit, but we may well get for Christmas loads of those fake texts which invite you to sign up to a cloned website to pay a processing fee on a delivery. So they get your bank details and clean out your account. More than half of Brits have been targeted by such text scams. I got one myself just yesterday. The fact that some people fall for these can partly be blamed on this crazy Brexit, because consumers have become all too familiar with extra charges imposed on their online purchases from an EU seller, and it's very hard to distinguish genuine from fraudulent. But those who assert I'd never fall for that, or how stupid would you have to be, do, I think, need to pause for thought. I wanted this motion to come to conference because although thankfully I've not so far fallen victim, I've been following developments on this for several years and have read many heartrending cases of intelligent, careful people of all ages tricked into losing life-changing amounts of their savings with all the trauma as well as loss that entails. But now we all have to navigate not only phishing by email, smishing by SMS, but also vishing and number spoofing through voice calls. The scammers are so clever that they hijack your bank's phone number so it shows up on your screen as perfectly genuine, and they then persuade you that your account is in danger and you need to transfer money to them, of course. The telecoms regulator says that the earliest it can stamp out number spoofing is 2025, for heaven's sake. It's completely unfair and indeed a scam in itself that so much blame is put on the individual consumer to protect themselves. In another favourite ploy, when cloned websites or ads for fantastic investment opportunities are posted online, regulators prefer to protest, well, we issued warnings to consumers, rather than require the highly profitable tech giants to prevent and take down such frauds. The financial and other regulators need finally to get tough, because until they do, they're letting the banks and financial firms gaslight us. So-called authorised push payments, where customers are duped into transferring money online to criminals, cost almost £500 million in 2020. Banks are meant to reimburse no-fault victims, but in an estimated half of cases, they refuse, because it's only a voluntary code. And anyway, they claim the customer should have protected themselves. Indeed, the very term authorised push payment is, in my opinion, an insult, with the implication that the customer has authorised the criminal to burgle them. And we can't even shop around for the most decent banks for refunds, since the percentages for each one are a secret. They need to be named and shamed so that there is public exposure and pressure on the laggards to improve their service to the customer, and indeed to bring in better online safeguards like so-called confirmation of payee. Conference, I hope you will agree that this motion sensibly encourages a much greater priority being given to this hugely damaging crime of fraud, damaging socially and emotionally as well as financially. Regulators as well as industries are failing us, and where more powers are needed for regulators, these should be legislated for. Finally, I hope you will also support the very sensible amendment from ALDC. Chair, I beg to move.
Thank you, Sarah. I now ask David Chadwick to stand by, and I call Councillor Heather Kidd, the Liberal Democrat lead on the Local Government Association Safer and Stronger Communities Board, to propose the amendment.
Thank you. This is a very, very worthy piece of work, but you have missed a major player in avoiding scams and fraud across the board. And local councils have worked on this for many years, but now we're facing councils with less than 6 qualified trading standards officers who are greatly stretched. In practice, it means their capacity for this really dedicated work is particularly vulnerable to fraud and scams. So just to give you a clue to how this can affect us, in 2019 to 20, local trading standards teams provided support to over 21,000 scam victims and saved consumers over 22.7 million by disrupting scams and mass marketing fraud. Alongside local trading standards work, the National Trading Standards team, led by Buckinghamshire Council and Surrey County Council, identified 1,396 victims and saved consumers 42,596 through 196 investigations. So that just gives you a tip of the iceberg of actually what trading standards through councils can do. We also have teams doing recent work to disrupt scams that have included work to disrupt scams linked to TV licensing payments, Marks and Spencer voucher phishing scams, social media, fraudulent lottery scams, as well as the installation of call blockers in homes of vulnerable residents. The Friends Against Scams programme has recruited more than 500,000 people to promote awareness and the risk of scams. And what I'd like to highlight here is that actually during the pandemic, many Liberal Democrat councillors on the ground were using information and a number of different things that we can share through social media, but also on Focus and so on, to make sure people are really aware of what's going on out there. So it's more than just the council officers. We should value the fact that we work grassroots up, and councillors can have a fundamental part to play in all of this. Trading standards teams have also been extremely active throughout COVID, and I must say I've used a tremendous amount of what they have provided for me locally and actually nationally. But the capacity is being cut increasingly. So I would like to make sure that in future the Liberal Democrats across the board remember that local government is vitally important, and the more that we can do on the ground is to actually get information out is a vital part of what we all do. But we need to get the funding into councils to be able to continue that work and improve it, so that we can work with the police and we can work with all the liaison groups that actually work on this across the board. So I urge everybody to support the amendment that comes in after line 58, paragraph F. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I now ask Councillor Jo Otton to stand by and call David Chadwick from Cheltenham to speak for the motion as a whole.
Thank you. Building a better, safer internet should be a priority for any modern government. because the internet becomes more dangerous every day. As the motion details, online fraud is growing, and most of it is cross-border in nature, which is pretty scary because it means that anyone with an internet-connected device is potentially under threat from anybody else with an internet-connected device anywhere in the world. Now, it's a government's job to keep its citizens safe. Instead, we have a government that can't get its act together for long enough to pass the legislation required to protect us. The Online Harms Bill was first proposed in April 2019. Since then, it has had 4 government ministers responsible for it, and it's had 2 different names, which makes it the legislative equivalent of a flower baby. But unlike a flower baby, this is something that we can't afford the government to drop. So thank you to Baroness Ludford and Lord Marks for bringing forward this motion. Law and order cannot be a topic that we surrender to the Conservatives. As Liberals, we believe in freedom. Well, nobody is free without a path to justice. Nobody is free without 21st century laws to protect them from 21st century threats. How can we expect people to believe in democracy if only 1 in 200 victims of fraud actually see justice happen? And calling the police to report a crime takes a lot of courage, and yet 99.5% of those people currently end up disappointed, turned away from the system that's supposed to be designed to protect them. And we don't even have the figures for the number of people who don't bother reporting fraud because they don't see a chance of justice anyway. And with a record like that, who can blame them? So let's hold the government to account for its appalling record on solving crime. Let's make justice a part of our strong Liberal message. Let's back the motion and the amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for your brevity. I now ask Councillor Darrell Smalley to stand by and call Councillor Joe Otten from Sheffield to speak on the motion as a whole.
Yeah, thank you, Conference. Sarah Ludford was right to talk about a tsunami of fraud and attempted fraud in this country. It's extraordinary when you think that if you get an unsolicited voice call or text message or contact on social media, for many of us, it's more likely than not that that will be an attempted fraud. It's quite extraordinary that a crime should dominate our social life in quite that way, and it's going unnoticed. And it's all very well to say let's educate the victims. Well, of course we should, but quite rightly, this motion is calling for more to be taken and more to be done by the banks and the social media. But what I want to talk about is law enforcement. Isn't it extraordinary that we just have so little in the way of law enforcement when it comes to fraud? I've been a member of the South Yorkshire Police and Crime Panel for the last 5 years, and it's been clear to me that the forces simply aren't set up to do that. And I'm sure other local forces are the same. Not set up in skills, in resources, in technology. They're not focused on fraud. They're focused on in-person crimes that happen in the real world, and because that's what they've always done and that's what they do. They're not even almost expected to really deliver on fighting fraud. What happens? You report a fraud. You go to action fraud. Possibly they'll be able to. They'll have something they can give to your local force or to the local force of the criminals and say there's something you can investigate. There's something you may be able to prosecute. In a tiny number of cases of those, the force will actually be able to do something. How have we got to this? The forces are not. The forces are not able to do the job, and they're not doing the job. What we need is a high-level strategy that looks at the solutions that could be done. That looks at the technology that an anti-crime operation would need. I mean, if you think 10, 20 years ago, email was almost useless for the amount of malicious content you had every time you open your email box. Email has come back. Email has been saved. A lot of us thought that would never happen. So it's possible. The technology makes it possible. We could do the same with social media and with text and voice calls, but it needs a high-level strategy. It needs people sat around the table with the power to change it and heads banged together. And I hope with this motion we can do it. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joe. I now ask Councillor John Bull to stand by and call on Councillor Darrell Smalley from York to speak for the motion as a whole.
Many thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, Conference. I'm, as mentioned, a councillor in Lib Dem led York, and I'm exec member for Culture, Leisure and Communities at City of York Council. I'm also on North Yorkshire's Police, Fire and Crime panel. I'm speaking today in support of the amendment and the motion, hopefully as amended. As the amendment seeks to make clear, local government is a key sector in supporting communities, businesses and individuals in tackling fraud and scams. Local authorities work within established relationships with a vast number of agencies to further the prevention and detection of fraud. In York, similar to many councils, we work hand in hand with the police, the Audit Commission, the courts, DWP, the Office of Fair Trading, and many affected community groups. Councils play a key role in raising awareness of fraud and scams, such as publicising all successful prosecutions, either undertaken by themselves or by partner organisations, to act as a deterrent against future fraud. In York, our targeted campaign of publicity is undertaken each year to raise awareness of fraud to staff, members, councillors, the public and other agencies. This publicity raises awareness about potential fraud and ensures that all stakeholders are alert to the possibilities of fraud, and annually explains the procedures to be followed if they have any suspicions of fraud or scams. We all know the state that local government finances in thanks to this Conservative government. We must give councils the tools to do their bit in this national effort against fraudsters and scammers. Within the excellent proposals in this motion, local government will need to do its bit alongside partner institutions, and this minor amendment seeks to reflect this. I'd urge all members to support this amendment and then, of course, support the motion as amended. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you for your brevity again, Daryl. I now ask Lord Jonathan Marks QC to stand by and call on Councillor John Ball from Ealing and the FCC to summate on the amendment.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, Conference. I warmly welcome this motion and I'm delighted that Sarah brought it forward. It's absolutely right to state that fraud does not get the focus it deserves from the government or the police, and to propose a concrete action plan to address this. But the motion can be improved by Amendment 1's recognition of the vital role of local government in tackling scams and its demand that the government provides adequate funding to enable this. Listening carefully to this debate, I've not detected a huge flurry of opposition to our amendment, but I'd like to reinforce the strong case for it. So despite the large number of councillors speaking in this debate, too often as a party we ignore the local government dimension, despite the fact that Liberal Democrat councillors up and down the country are a powerful force for good, whether controlling councils, providing pressure from the opposition benches, or fighting for local people as backbench councillors. As Heather said, councillors are very often the trusted local faces who can help residents avoid getting scammed, but council officers also have a vital role in protecting people from fraud and investigating scammers in the form of their trading standards departments. The savage cuts that local government has suffered year after year under the Conservative government have severely damaged councils' trading standards departments. The Chartered Trading Standard Institute's workforce survey shows that average trading standards budgets have been slashed from £1.2 million in 2010-11 to only £860,000 in 2018-19. These cuts mean that nationally, nearly 100 trading standards professionals have been axed, equivalent to the total trading standards teams of 10 councils. Many councils now have less than 6 qualified trading standard staff, despite the huge range of statutory duties that they have to cover, and that list has got longer due to Brexit. So in practice, this means less capacity for dedicated work with those who are particularly vulnerable to fraud and scams, despite the huge increase in the prevalence of online fraud. The scope of fraud and scams is broad. I once received a financial scam letter in the post, but the vast bulk of this is, of course, online. I think most of us have had Facebook friend requests from fake profiles, had bogus transactions appear on our credit or debit cards, or had phishing emails or texts pretending to be from courier companies, banks, and so on, that are really attempts to separate us from our cash. A friend of mine who's looking for a job lost access to her bank account when what looked like an email from a recruitment agency turned out to be a money laundering scam, and the bank froze her account. Another friend lost thousands when an eBay purchase of video equipment turned out to be fraud. And I have had hundreds of pounds of bogus transactions added onto my credit card due to ID fraud. Online fraud is all around us. It's the crime that most of us see every day, and it costs us collectively billions, and yet sadly the government and police take it so much less seriously than physical crime. Action fraud takes reports but does nothing. All too often the police aren't interested at all. To conclude, scams are a huge problem which needs to be addressed by the government to deliver action through an online crime agency, through the banks, and importantly by properly funding local government. Please unanimously support Amendment 1 and the substantive motion. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, John. I now call Lord Jonathan Marks QC, our House of Lords spokesperson on justice, to summate on the motion.
Conference, we have all been the victims of scams or attempted scams, whether we've fallen for them or not. Whether online or by telephone, young or old, for big sums or small. And this motion aims to tackle the issue. We recognise the problem, we see how fast it's going, how much harm it causes, and how the victims are so often the most vulnerable who can least afford to lose money. There are so many ways that the fraudsters trick their victims. Investment scams, the so-called boiler room scams, where absurdly high rewards are offered if the victim gets in quick and transfers money to the scammer. Authorized push payment fraud, using faster payments or direct transfer systems, where scammers persuade victims to transfer money to their account rather than the people the victims intended to pay. Phishing scams, where bogus officials pretend to be from HMRC, or the victim's bank, or solicitors. The dishonest inventiveness is boundless. Then they con their victims into giving away account details, often pretending the victims are due some money, and then they simply raid the victim's account. Fraudulent free trial offers, where a free trial period turns into a nightmare of repeated and seemingly unstoppable withdrawals. Sarah and Heather and others described even more. The motion has the figures and they're frightening. And they're behind a widespread picture of losses that victims cannot afford, of anxiety and ill health, of savings lost and with them well-being and peace of mind, often lives ruined. And to date, the response from law enforcement, from regulators, from our financial services industry, from internet providers and from government has been inadequate, as David pointed out, as did Joe with his experience of police work. There's far too much of, it's not our problem, not our responsibility. The banks should be on the front line. They introduce direct payment systems. They should be doing all they can to protect their customers, reimbursing them as they've promised if they fall victim when not at fault, and quickly and efficiently. Internet providers and social media companies must take responsibility too. But most importantly, government can help by establishing and encouraging a warning system. We describe it as a national real-time warning system for scams. The scammers change their scams daily. We can keep abreast of them by ensuring that scams are quickly publicized and widely recognized. We're getting a bit better, but the public needs government, and yes, local government, to play their part. And Heather, Darryl and John, we recognise the role of local government and absolutely agree Amendment 1. All must engage with the public in an ever-alert, light-footed, dynamic and mutually protective effort to beat the fraudsters and keep the vulnerable safe, and at the same time to protect our economy and our financial systems. So please support this motion and support Amendment 1.
Thank you, Jonathan. We're now going to move to two votes. The first vote is on Amendment 1. You'll find the voting panel on Hopin on the top right of your screen. Cara, could you start the vote on Amendment 1 now? And you have 2 minutes to vote. Please vote now. The votes are now in. The vote was 197 votes in favour and 5 votes against. The amendment is therefore carried and is now incorporated into the motion as a whole for the next vote. So now we vote on the motion as a whole. Cara, could you start the vote on amendment, the amended motion? And you have 2 minutes to vote. Please vote now. The votes are now in on the main motion. The vote was 220 votes for and 4 votes against. So the motion is carried overwhelmingly. Can I thank all our speakers, my aides, Nick DaCosta and Cara Jenkinson, and I now hand over to Jenny Rigg to chair the next session, F46.
Good afternoon, conference. You'll be pleased to know we are now running back just about to time. Welcome to motion F46, Ending Violence Against Women and Girls, which you'll find on pages 116 to 119 of the agenda. There's one amendment, which you will find on page 119A of the agenda. I am aware that this is an emotional issue upon which that feelings will run high, so without wishing to jinx anything, I'd like to remind members not to mention anything that's to do with an ongoing disciplinary or legal case, or anything which might be in breach of the members' code of conduct. I was oversubscribed with cards for this debate, but if you all keep to time, I should be able to squeeze most of you in. So without further ado, I now ask Sarah Carr to stand by, and I call Christine Jardine, MP for Edinburgh West, to propose the motion. Christine.
Thank you, Jenny. It's my dubious pleasure to propose this motion about ending sexual violence against women and girls, because sexual violence, sexual harassment, domestic abuse, just about every woman listening to this speech will sadly have experienced at least one of them. Endemic in our society, and during COVID-19 and lockdown, the situation's been getting dramatically worse. An estimated 4.9 million women were victims of sexual assault in England and Wales alone last year. But let's not imagine that this is somehow going to go away or get better on its own once the pandemic's under control, life is near normal. No, this is a problem which has been around for a long time, often hidden away, stigmatized, women who suffer it too afraid to speak for fear of not being supported. It's strange to think now, but a generation ago, my generation, our conscience was pricked by a pop song. Suzanne Vega's Luca, who lived on the second floor and told her neighbour, if you hear something late at night, some kind of trouble, some kind of fight, just don't ask me what it was. And she explained, they only hit until you cry. And after that, you don't ask why, you just don't argue anymore. Sadly, that summed up the situation, real life for so many women. And I'd love to say it's gone away since the 80s. And yes, we have made progress, but there's still a lot of work to do. The Domestic Abuse Bill, which recently passed through Parliament, is landmark legislation which was forged in cross-party consensus. I'm proud to have led on that for us. Proud about the concessions we gained, protections for women from facing their abusers in court, recognition that children who live in abusive homes can be affected their whole lives by the trauma, and acknowledgement that we need to treat misogyny, the root of so much abuse, as a hate crime, and steps towards that have begun. But I am also deeply disappointed in the areas where we fell short and determined that we won't let it rest. That's part of why this motion is so important to me. We have to tackle the fact that a disproportionate amount of recorded abuse is aimed at women from minorities, and it's the same for LGBT plus communities. The Domestic Abuse Act does not provide equal protection, particularly for migrant women, and the funding for domestic abuse services falls far short of the £200 million Women's Aid say they need. Perhaps worst of all, we failed as a country to ratify the Istanbul Convention, which would create a global network of refugees and services to protect women. But those are just the facts, the numbers, the legislation, not the reality, nor the role society has to play. I'm the mother of a 25-year-old daughter, whom I wished and genuinely believed we could achieve a world which was much safer for her generation than it had been for mine. But when I look at the domestic abuse and sexual assault figures and the reality of modern life, I realise we haven't. As a society, we are continuing to fail. I don't want, and I'm sure no parent in the country wants, to sit and worry for my daughter's safety when she goes out for a run. In their teenage or university years, we shouldn't have to constantly warn and remind of the danger of simply walking home, but we do. And it's not just the current generation that I fear we're failing, but all those previous ones who worked so hard for progress towards equality. And once we lose that, we lose our protection. It's just a couple of years since we celebrated the centenary of the first women to vote and be entitled to be elected. But surely the Pankhursts, Millicent Fawcett, Emily Davidson and the suffragettes did not go through that struggle for us all to be reminded that if we're walking to a polling station after dark, we should do so with our keys clenched firmly between our knuckles for protection. In this pandemic, we've seen so much of the progress we have made in women's rights and others' rights being reversed before our eyes. The United Nations estimates that the coronavirus pandemic could wipe out 25 years of increasing gender equality. And like I said, with that, our protection. Oh, I know there'll be many who watching this who will point out that men can also be victims of domestic abuse. And yes, they can. It's still overwhelmingly, however, an issue of violence against women and girls. And of all the important lines in this motion, there's one I'd like to pick out. Everyone, regardless of identity, has the right to have a life free from fear and violence. Everyone, regardless of identity. That isn't happening in our society, and if we want to achieve it, we have to stop thinking just about punishing abusers. We have to prevent it. We have to invest in education, raising awareness, especially among young boys, encourage cross-agency cooperation, make it the responsibility of all local authorities to ensure staff are trained to detect and respond to domestic abuse, and to reach people, to make sure they're aware, not just of the problem and of the trauma, but that there is support available. We need it splashed all over TV in an NHS-style publicity campaign. Throw the spotlight on this issue like never before. And as a party, we have to make sure people know that we have a plan to invest in helping survivors of sexual or domestic abuse to recover. We want to improve the outcomes for victims of sexual violence. Make sure migrant women have equal access so that nobody in the 21st century feels that they have to endure the routine torture of domestic violence. That we never again make anyone feel that they have to explain away a bruise or a black eye by saying that they walked into a door because they're afraid the support will not be there if they speak out. Conference, please, for all those women and girls who feel the fear of walking home alone, listening for their daughter's key in the door, or worrying that their sister, daughter, or friend isn't quite herself at the moment, or has had a few more accidents than really normal recently. All of us, please support this motion.
Thank you very much, Christine. Can I ask Chris Northwood from Manchester to stand by, please? And I now call Sarah Carr from Wokingham Borough, who wishes to propose Amendment 1. Sarah.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for listening, and thank you for a great opening speech there, Christine. I could certainly understand what you're talking about there, and obviously the systemic objectification of women it is the issue that we have. I'm really pleased to see this policy motion come to conference and fully support it. The amendment I'm proposing is to strengthen it further based on the experiences I've had in my role as a local councillor. I've lost count of the number of times I've been contacted in that role by distraught parents, usually mothers, and sat in numerous meetings with children's services because of the lack of understanding around abuse. One mother left her abusive husband. When it came to child custody, despite all the evidence of this abuse and the continuing post-separation abuse, social workers simply used the term parental conflict in their report. The level of access that father had to those children led to those primary school aged children being abused, one of them sexually. This is just one example of the many cases I've dealt with. Repeatedly, abuse from one parent to another is called parental conflict when child custody arrangements are being decided. Parental conflict puts equal blame on both parents for what is actually abuse and coercive control, and in many cases leads to children being put at risk. It also doesn't take account of the fact that just because abuse isn't directed at a child, that doesn't mean they are not negatively impacted by it. They are victims of that abuse. There is also an assumption that access to both parents is in the best interests of the child. For the most part, yes, it is. But when we're talking about abuse, that isn't always the case. An assumption must always be in the interests of what is best and safe for a child, above and beyond the interests of an abusive parent. Finally, we also have to understand that not all victims of abuse leave their abusive partners. They still very much need support, and there is a gap currently in this regard. I do appreciate that both men and women suffer from abuse. It is women that are disproportionately affected, which is why this amendment is relevant to the motion. I'm simply fed up and disgusted of witnessing distraught parents having to hand over their children to an abuser, often with the children not wanting to go, but knowing the repercussions of them not doing so could be that the children are removed from their care. I urge you to all support this amendment and this motion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can I ask Charlie Hastard from Lambeth Borough to stand by? And I now call Chris Northwood from Manchester, who wishes to speak for lines 56 and 57 of the motion. Chris.
Good afternoon, Conference. My day job is working for Culture Shift. We're a company which partners with the education, public and private sector to allow survivors and victims of sexual assault and harassment to report those incidents. Much of my work involves removing barriers from survivors to let them report what happened. So I'm heartened to see lines 56 and 57, which affirm a Lib Dem commitment to removing barriers, and I'd like to focus in my speech on those lines in particular. Conservative forces within this country are pushing back on making it easier to report incidents, and they want to build barriers to reporting rather than making it easier. Over the past few months, right-wing newspapers have pushed back against universities which have taken steps to make reporting easier. Time and time again, research shows that allowing an initial disclosure to be made anonymously can be the first step on the journey towards making a formal accusation and obtaining justice. And again, allowing disclosures about less serious incidents to be made, which by themselves may not be a criminal offence, but can add up to show a pattern of domestic abuse or similar, allows those who are victims to access support. But those conservative forces are pushing back on our partners and instead want them to increase the bar which a survivor can make a disclosure and access support, and instead limit them to only being able to make disclosures that meet the bars for criminal prosecution, with no thought about how survivors who might just want to access support and rather than seek justice at that time might need to be supported. Conference, this would result in fewer incidents rightly being recorded and more victims going unsupported and unheard. Worse, these right-wing activists are adopting liberal language in their pushback against allowing easier reporting. Toby Young's Free Speech Union published an open letter accusing universities that allowed anonymous reporting of incidents of sexual harassment of being in breach in their free speech duties, as if the right of using free speech to verbally harass women and girls matters more than using the free speech of them to speak up about what's happened to them. Conference, although I've only spoken on the one small part of this motion which I have a deep knowledge, I overwhelmingly implore you to support this motion as a whole with Amendment 1. We need to push back on those right-wing voices who want to hide behind free speech as an excuse to continue enabling abusers and protect women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Can I ask Talia Marrington from St Ives to stand by? And I now call Charlie Hastard from Lambeth Borough, who wishes to speak in favour of lines 95 to 97. Charlie.
Hello, Conference. I wanted to specifically speak to these lines because I'm a survivor of a sexual assault. I am a trans person and I'm disabled, and I was the victim of a prolonged sexual assault in central London. The reason it was prolonged is because this man put his hand on my hand. The reason he put his hand on my hand was because that's the hand my walking stick was in. He could not have more effectively stopped me from leaving if he had tied me down. When I went to the police and tried to report it, there was so little understanding of why that was such a problem. There was so little understanding of why the fact I'm trans influenced how badly this affected me, and I had to explain things constantly over and over again. I ended up not pushing through because I had a hard enough time explaining to the police while traumatized why there was additional trauma. I had a police officer, a woman police officer, tell me that this half-hour assault in the centre of London near a bus stop, seconds walk away from the Houses of Parliament, wasn't that bad because he only touched me over my clothes. We need specialist support services for BME women, for LGBT people, for disabled people, because we have complex needs. We have needs that I don't want to have to explain. We shouldn't have to explain why X thing was more traumatic because of a specific characteristic we happen to have. More importantly, we need to make sure we have good access to things like interpretation services. a relationship with an interpreter it needs a lot of trust. You're having to relate things to a third party or through a third party. You need people with specific training and skills around language that's used, around cultural understanding, and that includes things like deaf culture and disability culture. We need to make sure that we have police officers who understand how to ask questions of people with learning disabilities, of how to deal with people who use alternate communication methods like speaking boards or letterboards or Makaton. So whilst the entire motion is spectacularly important, these lines are so essential. It is so important that these lines have been included, and I really thank the people who wrote this motion for making sure that they were put in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for that very moving speech. I would like to ask Karen Lindsay from West Lothian to stand by, and I now call Talia Marrington from St Ives, who wishes to speak for the motion and the amendment and several specific lines as well. Talia.
Hello. I think we all remember Sarah Everard and the murder. And during that time, there was just something that I kept hearing on the radio when politicians spoke about the murder. And they kept mentioning streetlights. And there was something about that I just thought it was so, I was so upset by that the politicians' Conservative Party response was to talk about streetlights, when this is about ending violence against women and girls. There was something fundamental there where I just thought we've got something wrong here. This isn't about streetlights. This is about education, and it's about respect. And that starts, we might not be able to help every child that lives in a house and sees and experiences that sort of thing and thinks that's normal. But we have, within this, we can do something and change it. And I think it's so important because even moving into this, I think we're such an underrepresented group. And it's not surprising because who would go into this world? Who is going to speak up for us when you experience that firsthand as soon as you put yourself above the parapet? I particularly think we have to recognise misogyny as a hate crime because until it's understood, if it's sort of accepted that you put up with these things, it ends in rape and it ends in death and murder, but it starts with the disrespectful behaviour. And that's picked up and it's emulated by children from what they see, perhaps at home or on the streets or in school. And that's really what I wanted to say, that I think until we get this right up the agenda, nothing's going to change, but people will not go into this role. I'm sorry to say I didn't go or look at this. I looked at this 5 or 6 years ago. I thought I want to become a counsellor. I saw the refugee crisis. Jo Cox was murdered. I've got 2 children. And I'm sorry to say, I just thought at the time I couldn't do it. It's a real thing. And I think sometimes there are some people out there that think women have got equality. And we're so far away from that. So anything that this bill is just fantastic, and the amendment as well. We've got to do this. So I want to speak for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Talia. Can I ask Janie Little from North Somerset to stand by? And I now call Karen Lindsay from West Lothian, who is a member of our federal board and wishes to speak for the motion as a whole, and particularly in favour of lines 116 to 118. Karen. I think you're muted, Karen.
Typical. Sorry, everybody. Conference, I just want to say, first of all, thank you to everyone who's been involved in putting this motion together, and particularly to Janie Little. She turned so many ideas from so many of us into the coherent motion that you see before you today. She has helped the Young Liberals become a policy powerhouse of this party, and we're so lucky to have her, and I'm so looking forward to hearing her speech next. Back in March, after Sarah Everard's awful murder, we had a discussion amongst Scottish Lib Dem women about what we thought we could do to turn our anger into positive change that would make women safer. Because this is so wide-ranging, we came up with the idea of a commission to look at ways of preventing violence against women and girls in all its forms, which would report in the first year of the new Scottish Parliament. What needs to be done cuts across the whole of government, from education, and we're talking about 90% of girls experiencing sexism and being sent unwanted explicit images at school, to housing, sort of helping those in the sector identify and support victims of domestic abuse and help them stay in their own homes if it's safe to do so. From justice, given the pitiful number of successful rape prosecutions, to social security to tackle poverty. Well, they could start by keeping the £20 per week on universal credit and getting rid of the wicked 2-child limit and rape clause. And employment to tackle sexual harassment at work. And you can also add in planning to think about how you create safer communities. You need joined up thinking to bring all those strands together into a proper strategy. And we felt this would be a way of signalling to women that their concerns were being taken seriously by government. And it would also help keep the issue high on the agenda. After a few days of news coverage, just disappeared. But at the time, really useful conversations were being had in homes across the country. The greater understanding of how life was for women. So we thought this one day, and at 6:45 the next morning, I was on Good Morning Scotland talking about it. And then Liam McCarr, Justice spokesperson, asked then Justice Secretary of the Scottish Parliament what he thought, and he was really positive. 6 months on, Hums has moved on to health, and Shona Robertson is now the minister. Last week, Alex Cole-Hamilton asked her about it again, as soaring domestic abuse figures were announced. It's really disappointing that she was so dismissive of it. It annoys me that when independence is the issue, they can find money to pay civil servants to make the preparations for a referendum. I just want to see them put the same energy into helping half the population deal with the abuse and harassment we face every day, and I hope she reconsiders. I hope that you will support this comprehensive and detailed motion, which includes the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Can I ask Elizabeth Adams from Stratford-upon-Avon to stand by? And I now call Jenny Little from North Somerset, who is also the Young Liberals Policy Officer, the Lib Dem Women's Youth Officer, and most importantly, chaired the working group that created this motion. Janie.
Thank you so much. First of all, a massive thank you to everyone who worked with me on this motion. It was a fantastic effort. And also to everyone from PLUS and LDCRE who also looked over the motion and provided some feedback before it was submitted. I also, of course, preface this speech with a content warning that I'll be discussing sensitive issues. Conference, too many women and girls face violence, abuse and harassment. Report rates are low, and when women and girls do speak up, all too often justice just does not prevail. We have a Tory government which is not doing anywhere near enough to tackle violence against women and girls. The government has underfunded vital domestic abuse services, sidelined migrant women, and failed to ratify the Istanbul Convention, among many other things. Disabled women and LGBT+ women face disproportionate levels of abuse and deserve so much more support. Trans women particularly, despite being so vulnerable, do not get anywhere near what they need or deserve. And not only that, but they face disgusting abuse, accusations and fear-mongering and are constantly failed by this government. Young girls even face sexual harassment and abuse in schools. The findings from End Violence Against Women that a third of girls aged 16 to 18 have experienced unwanted sexual touching in school is just awful. Even the streets aren't safe. I remember people commenting on the size of my breasts while I was walking to school in school uniform, behaviour that just became normal to me. Conference, every woman here can give an example of awful things that have happened to them or their friends. I have friends who have been raped, friends who have been touched inappropriately and without consent, friends who've been sexually harassed in the streets and felt powerless to do anything about it. I faced non-consensual sexual advances from a number of people of a variety of ages on a number of occasions while under 18. I cannot begin to put into words how degrading it feels, as if I were being told to believe that even as a child, I was worth nothing more than my body and the sexual gratification it gave men. This motion includes a wide range of measures that would help to protect women and girls, prevent and identify violence, provide support and bring justice. We need better support and outcomes for victims. We need women and girls to feel safe on the streets. We need a long-term plan to start taking action now and continue to do everything we can to tackle violence against women and girls domestically and globally. This motion covers all of that and more. Conference, please support this motion. Too many women and girls are suffering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janie. Can I ask Natasha Chapman from Lincoln, Sleaford and North Hykeham to stand by? And I now call Elizabeth Adams from Stratford-upon-Avon, who wishes to speak for the amendment and also for some of the specific lines of the motion. Elizabeth.
Conference. I survived domestic violence. I was physically attacked, left homeless and rehoused, but one of the most distressing periods was being subjected to a family court case lasting almost 18 months. It was clear from the repeated breach of court orders and disregard for my child's welfare that my abuser's court application had the sole purpose of inflicting continued harm and distress. I successfully fought my case, but at great cost, both financially and to my well-being at the time. Now, as a future pupil barrister about to begin practice in family law, the state of the system I am entering is deteriorating further. Last year's Harm Panel report gave devastating insight into how domestic abuse is handled in the family courts. In legislation, the court is required to prioritise the welfare of the child. In practice, this principle is often compromised by outdated attitudes, pro-contact culture at all costs, and catastrophic underfunding and resource constraints. Many victims feel court orders have put them at risk and allowed abuse to continue. The situation in the criminal courts is just as dire. Courts closed, trials postponed until 2023, criminal lawyers leaving the profession in droves. For victims of domestic or sexual abuse, where there are evidential challenges to begin with, the impact is catastrophic. Justice delayed is justice denied. Conference, we must fund our justice system. We must improve services and information for separating families to ensure no families are unwittingly driven to use court resources by lack of information or poor communication between local service providers. We must train police and CPS so they understand how trauma manifests, how victims and the evidence they give are impacted by the effects of trauma. And we must ensure that children's welfare is not superseded by lack of resources or default inappropriate contact at all costs when a parent is dangerous. We know that not dealing with domestic violence costs the economy billions of pounds more than if we invested in preventing it. Please support this motion and the amendment, but don't stop there. We need to go out and campaign on this, make it become law. I really feel if we work hard enough, we could be the generation that brings an end to gender-based violence in Britain. We know what needs to happen, so let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Can I ask Caroline Pidgeon to stand by, please? And I now call Natasha Chapman from Lincoln, Sleaford and North Hykeham, who wishes to speak for lines 61 to 63 and lines 95 to 97. Natasha.
I wish to speak in favour of the indicated lines, which deal with two separate issues that, to me, it's essential we connect. Age-appropriate sex and relationships education that's inclusive of all genders and sexual orientations is vital for protecting children by not only teaching them about consent, but also for equipping them with the language to speak out for themselves and be understood when they're in danger and they need help. Specialist services providing support for LGBT people who face domestic and sexual abuse are also essential. A 2008 survey, the largest of its kind to date, found that a quarter of lesbian and bisexual women in England reported having been a victim of domestic abuse, which is the same percent as the general population. And in 2/3 of these cases, the perpetrator was female. Physical violence occurred in over half of the cases. A Centre for Disease Control and Prevention population study found the prevalence of rape, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner was 61% for bi women, nearly 44% for lesbians, and 35% for heterosexual women. When you're in an abusive relationship, it's incredibly difficult for you to recognise, and it's made harder when you don't have the words to verbalise what's happening, even to yourself. Abusers isolate their victims because isolated people are easier to control. A lack of understanding and support from health professionals and institutions like schools, universities, and workplaces make lesbian, bi, and trans women more vulnerable to abuse, especially if they refuse to believe that they can be harmed by other women. Regressive laws in this country also let women down by minimising sexual violence. It's re-traumatising to be smugly told that you weren't raped because your attacker was another woman, and the law says they can't do that. If you're subjected to sexual contact you didn't consent to, that's assault. If anyone has sex with you without your consent, that is rape. Conference, please support this motion and Amendment 1. It's brilliantly written, and so is the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Can I ask Prue Bray from Wokingham to stand by, please? And I now call Caroline Pidgeon AM from Southwark, who wishes to speak in favour of the motion as a whole. Caroline.
Conference, I fully support this important motion. For many, home is a place of danger rather than a place of safety, and the pandemic has only exacerbated the already serious issues we face with violence against women and girls, as this motion rightly highlights. The justice system is failing survivors of domestic and sexual violence, made even worse over the last 18 months. The court backlog is having a truly devastating impact on survivors. Some victims and suspects will be waiting until 2024 for prosecutions to be heard, unless there is a massive increase in court availability. Rape and sexual cases are some of the most seriously impacted by the backlog too, with delays causing re-traumatisation for many survivors, impacting their ability to provide evidence or even attend trial. And I'm glad the motion raises the important issue of domestic abuse in minority communities. Just last week I visited the fantastic domestic violence charity Sister Space in Hackney, which provides specialist support services for Black and Afro-Caribbean women and girls. I heard stories from survivors who've been failed at every level, from the police and the justice system to their local authority and housing association. Often the difficulties they faced have been exacerbated by a lack of cultural understanding. And that is why specialist organisations like Sister Space are so important. And we must do more to train and ensure organisations across the board have an intersectional approach to tackling violence against women and girls. But we must also support survivors of domestic abuse to travel more easily and cheaply. And I was delighted to work with Transport for London earlier this year to secure free bus tickets for many survivors and refugees in London. Making it easier for women and girls to leave an unsafe home is so important, as well as increasing refuge provision. I'd also like to touch on the death of Sarah Everard back in March. Sarah's tragic death has caused many to further question, really, the way in which police officers deal with reports of violence against women. Not just because Sarah was murdered by a police officer, but because of the wider questions this, alongside the police's handling of the Clapham Common Vigil, raised. Women want to be heard on this issue, and it's essential that we set the agenda moving forward. We must ensure the discourse does not stray again into one about how a woman can keep herself safe, but instead what needs to change in our society. And that includes starting in schools with age-appropriate education, as we propose. Conference, this is an excellent motion. I commend the writers of it, and I hope you will join me in supporting it today. And let's take action going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Can I ask Caroline Voden from South Hams to stand by? And I now call Prue Bray from Wokingham to summate on behalf of Amendment 1. Prue.
Thank you, Jenny. This is a great motion and I support everything in it, and our amendment simply seeks to make it even better. Now, I'm a trustee of a new organisation which is currently registering as a charity. It's led by the amazing Vicky Robertson and it's called Kaleidoscopic UK, and please Google it. We are set up to provide more training and support to help schools and the courts and local authorities to properly understand domestic abuse. And the 3 points in the amendment that Sarah has put together are 3 points where at the moment we feel understanding is particularly lacking.
Before I stop, that's really all I want to say, except to say, please vote for the amendment and the motion. But what a set of wonderful speeches from the heart. And if I could, I would hug all of you. We've all been through something like this, and we need to do something about it. So please vote for this motion and vote for it with the whole heart, and let's do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prue. Can I now call Caroline Voden from South Hams to summate the motion as a whole, and then we will move to a pair of votes, firstly on the amendment and then on the motion as amended or not, as the case may be. Caroline.
Thank you. Conference, we have reached the last motion of the last day of the Liberal Democrat Autumn Conference. So if you're still with us, thank you very much and well done. This motion is one that I believe is crucially important to our society and to the very well-being of our country. Violence against women and girls is an epidemic, and it affects every single one of us. As women, as partners, husbands, sons and fathers, as teachers, as employers, as healthcare professionals. I'd like to thank everybody who helped write the motion. I'd like to thank Jamie for all her hard work, and to Christine, Karen and Caroline for contributing to the debate, amongst other contributions that I will mention. So I run a rape crisis centre in the southwest of England. Every day we support women whose lives have been affected by sexual violence or abuse. The long-term effects of the trauma they have experienced are staggering: physiological, psychological, social, economic. And I think we can even see that in the examples, the contributions we've had today, particularly from Elizabeth and Natasha. And I'd like to say well done, both of you, for getting to the end of your contributions. The trauma suffered by these women affects the way they live their daily lives, where they feel able or unable to go, their relationships, their mental health, their long-term physical health and well-being, friendships, the ability to hold down a job or progress in the workplace, and the list goes on and on. And for those who are already marginalised, who are disabled or lost in the immigration system, the effects are even worse. The government's domestic abuse bill is a good start in trying to address the issue of violence against women and girls, and it proves what can be achieved when women of all parties come together and achieve consensus. But it doesn't go far enough. As organisations that support victims of sexual violence and domestic abuse, we desperately need a long-term funding settlement. This work is not going to disappear in 2 or 3 years' time. We've been at it for decades, and as Christine said, this work will carry on when I'm long gone. But how can we plan a strategy to provide decent services, to recruit and retain good staff, if we have no idea how much funding we're going to receive in 18 months' time? How can we adequately support victims of sexual violence and domestic abuse if all the players in our criminal justice system are not fully trained in trauma-informed working? And I thank Charlie for her contribution, which made this very real. If juries are made up of people who buy into pernicious rape myths that end up blaming the victim. I'd like to thank Sarah Kerr for her amendment, which highlights the effect of domestic abuse on children. And how are we going to tackle the culture of sexual harassment and violence if we don't have a radical rethink about prevention and education? If organisations that have the expertise don't have the money to train and support our educators in schools and colleges? It's not good enough to boast about plans to lock up the very few perpetrators who ever make it to the end of our criminal justice system for longer. We need to start working on changing behaviour and culture. We need to take a serious look at the horrific effect pornography is having on our boys and young men. What would have been called hardcore porn just 20 years ago is now instantly available on every smartphone in the hands of an 11-year-old. We need wholesale societal change involving education, justice, and health systems. We need joined up thinking. We need ambition and determination. Conference, I urge you to vote for this excellent motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So we're now going to move to a pair of votes. The first will be on whether or not to accept the amendment. If I can ask Cara to make that live now, you should be able to find it in the polls tab on the right of your screen. Please go and vote now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that conference. I can announce that Amendment 1 has passed with 250 people voting in favour and only 3 against, so that's overwhelmingly passed. We now go to a vote on the motion as a whole, as amended by Amendment 1. Cara, if you could make that vote live, please. Thank you. You should similarly be able to find it in the voting tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll have 2 minutes to vote. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Conference. We now have the result for that vote, and the motion has passed with 260 votes in favour and only 2 votes against, so that's an extremely overwhelming pass. I would like to apologise specifically to Liz Jarvis, who's the Vice Chair of Lib Dem Women, who was the only person who put a card in before the deadline that I wasn't able to call for time. And I'd like to thank my aides, Nick DaCosta, and my voting aide, Cara Jenkinson. And I now hand over to our beloved President, Dr. Pack, who is going to present the party awards, which is the final item of conference. See you next year.
Our party is so dependent on amazing individuals who go above and beyond what we could reasonably expect of them that it's only fitting that we end our main conference sessions with the party awards. We now do these twice a year at both conferences in recognition of the fact that we have so many amazing colleagues to honour. This year, we've got 6 awards to give out at our autumn conference, starting with the President's Award, which acknowledges the exceptional contribution of people elected to public office. This year's winner is someone who has been campaigning in an area where we lost our last council seats in 2015. It wasn't easy coming back from that, but after campaigning 7 previous times, she finally won a city council seat, then went on to win a county council seat, and is now leader of the opposition on the county council. With her years of dedicated local campaigning, she's been absolutely central to putting us back on the political map in Worcester. And so I'm really pleased to announce the winner is Councillor Mel Alcott.
Conference, hello. I'm absolutely delighted to have won the President's Award. Having stood and campaigned 7 times before being elected as a city councillor in 2019, this award is particularly important to me. Now a city and a county councillor and a group leader at both, I would just like to say a huge thank you to my local party, Worcester Liberal Democrats, Worcestershire County Council Kickstart team, all members, supporters, friends, family and residents who have supported me. Thank you.
Our next award is the Dadabai Naroji Award, named after the Liberal MP who was the first Asian MP in this country. And it honours a local party for its efforts at improving the diversity of our elected public officials. This year's winners have put in sustained effort over many years in reaching out to their local Muslim community and building a strong relationship with the local mosque, and so attracting to the party someone who went on to become elected as the first ever Muslim town councillor in Royal Leamington Spa. So many congratulations to Councillor Mubarak Chowdhury and the whole Warwick District local party.
I'm very pleased to accept this award on behalf of the Warwick District local party. It is a special tribute to our Milverton Ward councillors at county, district and town level, led by Bill Gifford, who have engaged with and encouraged the Ahmadi Muslim community locally over many years and have now secured the election of Mubarak Chowdhury as the first ever Muslim councillor in Warwick District. Mubarak is now our diversity officer as well, and he's leading our effort to reach out into other ethnic minority communities, to other diverse groups, and indeed to European Union voters and their families. So thank you again for this award.
Our third award is the Harriet Smith Distinguished Service Award, open to any member never elected to public office. Harriet, who passed away in 2006, did so much for the party, and organisations like ours are so dependent on people like her. This year, there's a lovely twist to who we're recognising, but before we come to that, this year's winner was born into a Liberal family. In fact, born in the very same week that her father was elected a local councillor. She started stuffing envelopes as a child, even when she was barely tall enough to reach the stuffing table. among many, many tasks, she helped her mother for many years organise Liberal Democrat conferences in her part of the country. 25 years ago, she took over that task herself when her mother sadly passed away. So for a quarter of a century, she's been the voluntary conference organiser for the Scottish Liberal Democrats. She's also the younger sister of Harriet, in whose name we give this award. So it gives me even more pleasure than usual to announce that the winner this time of the Harriet Smith Award is younger sister Kirsty. Many congratulations.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you and how very honoured I am to receive this award in the name of Harriet Smith, who was ironically my eldest sister and would be extremely amused at the idea of someone in the family winning an award in her name. I guess we both have to thank our mother for this. Thank you again, and I'm really touched about it.
What a family. Next is the Belinda Airbrook Award, given to celebrate the efforts of people who work for our elected representatives in their local areas, whether it's a local party employee, political assistant to a council group, somebody who works in an MP's office, or similar. It's named after Belinda, who for many years was central to our successes in Kingston and Surbiton. This year's winner has for many years been secretary to perhaps one of our most successful council groups in the whole country, a group that has won 9 all-up council elections in a row now. She's central to their current successes, leading the candidate approval process, ensuring a large group of councillors run smoothly and helping them adapt smoothly to all the different strains caused by lockdown. So many congratulations to this time's winner, Judith Conway.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for this award. It's very kind of Jenny and Jake to nominate me. I'm pleased to be able to support Sutton's Lib Dem Council group, which is a long-standing group, as you know. They're a hard-working and committed bunch. It's also great to be part of the local Liberal Democrat activist group, who work hard as well, and that's always good fun. Thank you again. Bye.
Our penultimate award is the Patsy Colton Award, organised by Liberal Democrat women and named in honour of the MP for Cheadle, who died at a tragic early age of cancer in 2005. This award recognises other exceptional women in the party, and the winner this time, as well as supporting and motivating women from all backgrounds to stand as parliamentary and council candidates, leading training for the party and championing diversity, also played a key role in our fantastic result in Cheshire and Amersham by helping run front of house on so very, very many days. Many congratulations to this time's winner, Candy Piercy.
Thank you so much for giving me this award. I'm very touched. There are so many women who've done such fantastic things in the Liberal Democrats this year. In Cheshire and Amersham, there were women running every aspect of the campaign, not just a brilliant woman candidate, but all sorts of different roles, from the deputy campaign manager through to the front of house offices, through to backroom roles you'd never have heard of, and of course the number of women from all over the party who came to help. And I'd like to thank them, because I kind of feel that this award is as much for them as it is for me. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Finally, we have the David Penhaligon Award, named after the former Liberal MP, famed for saying, if you've got something to say, stick it on a piece of paper, stuff it through a letterbox. Still wise advice, and something you can only do if you've got a large team of engaged members and helpers. So this award recognises a local party that has been brilliant at doing that. This year's winner, for example, used a recent council by-election win to spur them to contact people who have helped, recruiting new members, signing up future poster sites, bringing in donations, getting lots of attendees at social events. Now, that by-election that spurred them was a slightly special one, because it was the by-election that saw Sarah Green elected to Parliament. So congratulations to this time's winners, Chiltern Liberal Democrats.
our local election campaign and in the by-election campaign in Cheshire and Amersham, we generated a huge amount of enthusiasm amongst the public. Many people wanted to show their support, particularly people who signed up to have a garden post. And since the election, we've been back to those people to knock on their doors and speak to them about the great results that we had, and also to get them involved in supporting us further. And we've signed up people as deliverers, as people to support our activities, and quite a lot of them have joined the party as a result as well.
One of the most rewarding and critically important parts of campaigning was just talking to people on the doorstep, and with our local knowledge being able to engage with people. They're hearing what our policies were, they're telling us what their issues were, empowering them to express their voice, and that's followed through post-election. We're hearing lots of people, we're out and about in the markets and on the doorstep, and maintaining that momentum to keep people engaged.
Right, so the door-to-door went extremely well. People were very enthusiastic and very pleased that we'd won. But also they can see the need and the purpose of getting more active and getting more involved. So we managed to recruit a few more, activists, and people will actually take a very active part in our local community.
What has been absolutely fantastic after the elections is having the opportunity to talk and speak to the community and be involved with so many activities. It's been absolutely fantastic, the response that we've had. And also going to individuals and groups of people, talking about their concerns, has been a major focus of the group. An individual myself, I'm just hugely thankful for the people, the response that they've given us, and we hope to work with you in the future and in the present, making things better and better. Let's go for it.
Hello, I am so proud of the team in Cheshire and Amersham for all of the work they've been doing since the by-election in recruiting new members, engaging new members, having events and activities. It's been a flurry of activity, and they are building on all the fantastic work you did helping to get me elected to this place. Our volunteers are mission critical to the success of our party, so thank you for everything that you've been doing, and good luck in the future.
Thank you, and I hope those successes give all of us inspiration about what we can achieve in our own areas too. Now, before we close our main conference session, some important thank yous. To all of the team in our conference hub, staff, volunteers, and the teams from Vivid and Quirk, thank you. A special thank you to our British Sign Language interpreters. We've been working with a new team this time, and the speed with which they've got to grips with our party jargon and conference peculiarities has been really impressive. Thank you also to Hopin, our conference software supplier, and to the conference and policy teams, both staff and volunteers, along with our amazing stewards and chat moderation team. Thank you to all the trainers, both staff and volunteers, who have put on such an impressive training programme for all of us. And thank you to those running fringes. And remember, we do have some more fringes coming this evening. Of course, many staff and volunteers have contributed in other ways too. Thank you to them, and above all, thank you to you for attending, for taking part. Conference exists for you to ensure that members are rightly at the heart of how our party is run. Because as Paddy Ashdown said in one of his very last speeches to us, you are the engine which drives the party, you are its force and its most important asset. It's become a tradition for me to use that quote from Paddy in closing our main conference session because it's so true. So thank you for attending, thank you for participating, and all the very best of luck for your future campaigning.
Thank you very much to the party president, Mark Pack, for presenting those awards and for the thank yous as well. I wanted to add my own personal thank you as the chair of Federal Conference Committee. I want to thank everyone involved in bringing us the online conference. Over the weekend, we've delivered over 110 hours of training. We've had 177 speakers on the range of debates and amendments and business motions that we've had. And it's been a remarkably fantastic conference, and I've been delighted to have chaired my first federal conference this autumn. I also want to place on thanks to the team at CCT Venue who hosted us, the team at Canary Wharf who hosted the leader's speech. I want to thank the team at Vivid, Hannah, Luke, and obviously Chris Dan, who has supported so many of our conferences. The conference office have been absolutely amazing. Susie, Amy, Diva, and Wilma. We couldn't do this without you. Chessie and Maddie leading on the training. Lucy Yakub, who sorted out all the speakers' cards for us. And Nuruddin, who gave us IT support throughout. The Whip's office and the parliamentary support team, who made sure that everyone kept to time. The moderators, who made our chat both enjoyable but ensured that we were all behaving ourselves and we kept the rules and didn't post links. I was trying to be very careful about that. I also want to thank the interpreters of Colour Network. The new team we worked with this year have been brilliant and have done such an amazing job. I also obviously want to place on my thanks to the Federal Conference Committee. I'm delighted to be part of that group, and they make my job so much easier. And it's probably, in my view at least, the best committee in this party. But also, as Mark said, I want to thank you, the members. You make conference, you make it happen, you make it the vibrant exercise and the vibrant event that it is. So thank you. And I look forward to seeing you at our next conference.